In a world where power can easily become a weapon, when the badge becomes a weapon, a woman's fight against police harassment exposes the painful reality faced by countless individuals who suffer under the weight of injustice. Jessica's journey reveals the harrowing struggle against an authority figure who uses his badge to intimidate and control, forcing her to fight back against the odds. Join us as we explore themes of suffering, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of a woman determined to reclaim her life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below with your thoughts, and be sure to stay with us until the end for a powerful reflection on this important story. Jessica strolled leisurely through the sunlit paths of Pinewood Park, relishing the calm that surrounded her. The early afternoon light filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. She'd chosen this place for its quiet charm, a small escape from the hustle of her daily life. Today was a rare day off, and she had planned to spend it unwinding in nature, a pleasure she didn't often afford herself. With a warm coffee in one hand and a novel in the other, Jessica felt as if the world had slowed down just for her. Around her, families enjoyed picnics, children laughed as they chased each other, and couples strolled hand in hand. A sense of peace filled the air, one that Jessica cherished deeply. She found an empty bench under a tree and settled in, sipping her coffee and immersing herself in the first few pages of her book. Every now and then, she would look up, smiling at the birds flitting through the branches, their cheerful chirps filling the silence between paragraphs. As she read, she felt a subtle, nagging awareness that something was out of place. Jessica glanced around, noting a few people walking by, none of whom seemed particularly threatening. Yet, an inexplicable sense of unease stirred in her chest. Shaking it off, she returned to her book, telling herself that perhaps she was just not used to taking time off. Jessica's mind drifted to her husband, Tom, a dedicated FBI agent who had been as busy as she was lately. They had both agreed to keep their professions low profile, especially in public, given Tom's work's sensitive nature. He had often reminded her about the importance of discretion, urging her to stay aware of her surroundings and keep a low profile. But Pinewood Park felt safe. It was familiar territory, and it seemed far removed from the dangers Tom often faced. Time passed, and Jessica became engrossed in her reading. She didn't notice the man approaching until he was almost upon her. A sudden shadow fell across her book, and she looked up, startled. Standing before her was a tall man in a police uniform. His gaze was hard, scrutinizing her with an intensity that felt out of place in the otherwise tranquil park setting. "Ma'am," the man said, his tone brisk and uninviting. Jessica nodded politely, though she felt a prickling discomfort. "Afternoon, officer," she replied, trying to match his formality with calm respect. The man, who wore a badge with the name Carter, studied her for a moment longer. "Can I see some identification?" he demanded. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. There was no reason for a routine ID check, especially not in this peaceful park where people were merely enjoying their day. She hesitated, meeting his stare, trying to understand his motives. "Is there a problem, Officer Carter?" she asked, keeping her tone even, though unease stirred within her. Carter's expression hardened, and he leaned in closer, his voice low and cold. "I didn't ask you if there was a problem, ma'am. I asked you for identification." His gaze flicked over her, judgmental and piercing. Jessica felt the muscles in her shoulders tighten as she held his stare. Something about his demeanor didn't sit right. His eyes lacked the warmth she was used to seeing in officers of the law, replaced by a gleam that made her feel small, as though she were being appraised rather than spoken to. "Officer, I'm here on my day off, just enjoying some peace. Is there a specific reason for your request?" she asked, her voice steady, refusing to let him intimidate her. Carter's jaw clenched, and his posture grew even more rigid. He appeared irritated by her resistance, though she was well within her rights. "Let me put it this way," he said, voice dripping with a thinly veiled threat. "If you're not hiding anything, you shouldn't have a problem with a simple ID check." The air around them seemed to grow colder, and Jessica felt the curious eyes of passers-by on them. Her mind raced. She knew her rights, but Carter's tone suggested that he was prepared to escalate the situation. Yet, something deep within her refused to yield to his pressure. She sensed that giving in would only encourage him, and if she showed any sign of weakness, he would take full advantage of it. Jessica took a breath, reminding herself of Tom's words on staying calm in tense situations. She didn't need to explain her private life to this man, nor justify her presence in the park. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore that this situation had the potential to escalate. "Officer," she began, her voice steady and measured, "I'm here with no ill intentions. I don't see any cause for concern. I'd appreciate it if you'd allow me to enjoy my afternoon." Carter's lips curled into a smirk, a hint of something dark flickering in his eyes. "Is that so?" he replied, mockingly. "Look, ma'am, it doesn't matter why you're here. I'm asking for ID, and if you continue resisting, I'll have to assume you're hiding something." Jessica felt her patience thinning, but she maintained her composure. She could feel a few people nearby casting curious glances, and the weight of their attention both reassured and unnerved her. In a firm but calm voice, she responded, "I'm waiting for my husband, who should be joining me soon. Perhaps this conversation can wait until he arrives." The moment she mentioned her husband, she noticed a flicker of doubt cross Carter's face, but he quickly brushed it off, his posture unyielding. "Why don't you make things easier for both of us and just show me your ID?" he insisted, his tone growing sharper. Jessica's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She could sense that he was waiting for her to break, to show some sign of vulnerability or fear. But Jessica had spent years standing her ground in challenging situations, and she wasn't about to fold now. With quiet resolve, Jessica looked Carter directly in the eyes. "Officer Carter, I'm not obligated to comply with random ID checks without cause. Now, unless you can provide a legitimate reason, I'd like to return to my reading." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, an intense silence settled between them. Carter's face reddened slightly, and his jaw tensed as he stared her down, visibly frustrated by her resistance. But Jessica held firm, her gaze unwavering. At that moment, another figure approached, an elderly man who had been sitting on a nearby bench, watching the exchange. Clearing his throat, he looked at Carter and then at Jessica with a friendly smile. "Is there a problem here, officer?" he asked politely, his voice carrying a calm authority. Carter shot the man a sharp look, clearly irked by the interruption. "No problem at all," he replied, his tone laced with irritation. But Jessica could see that he was thrown off balance by the man's intervention. She seized the moment, allowing herself a small, reassuring nod to the elderly man, who subtly acknowledged her in return. Carter took a step back, giving Jessica a final, penetrating glare. "I'll be around, ma'am," he muttered, his voice low, almost a threat. He straightened, then turned and walked away, though Jessica could feel the weight of his lingering gaze. As she exhaled, Jessica's tension began to ease, though the encounter left her shaken. She felt a mix of relief and unease, the peace of her afternoon shattered by the encounter. Gathering herself, she resumed her place on the bench, her thoughts a storm of questions and emotions. She glanced at the path, hoping Tom would arrive soon, feeling a newfound appreciation for his presence and the calm he always brought into her life. Before we continue with this heartwarming story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This is how you can contribute and help us continue bringing meaningful stories about justice and overcoming challenges. Click the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Let's keep going. Jessica continued to sit, her eyes fixed on her book, though her mind was miles away, still replaying her recent encounter with Officer Carter. Her pulse had just begun to steady when she caught sight of him once more, lingering near a tree several feet away. He was watching her, a thin, barely concealed smirk on his face. The sight made her heart pound again, an uncomfortable reminder of the intimidation he had wielded over her moments earlier. She took a steadying breath, looking down at her watch. Tom should be arriving soon. She had texted him earlier, telling him she'd be at Pinewood Park, and he had promised to join her as soon as he finished up at the bureau. The thought of his presence provided a small sense of relief. Tom's calm, assured demeanor always made her feel protected, but until he arrived, she'd have to hold her own. As if reading her thoughts, Carter began walking toward her again, his steps purposeful and slow. Jessica's grip tightened on her book. This time, she wasn't going to let him get away with making her feel small. He stopped just inches away, his imposing figure casting a shadow over her once more. "Still here, I see," he said, his voice tinged with a mocking tone. He folded his arms across his chest, studying her with an intensity that felt invasive. "Yes, officer," Jessica replied evenly, meeting his gaze. "Is there a reason you're back, or are you just passing by again?" Carter's smirk widened, his eyes narrowing. "You're awfully brave, aren't you? Most people would just show their ID and be on their way. Not you, though." He took a step closer, leaning down so that his face was almost level with hers. "What makes you think you're so special?" Jessica felt a surge of indignation, but she kept her voice calm. "Officer, I have the right to be here without unnecessary harassment. I'm not causing any trouble, and frankly, I don't appreciate being treated like I am." He chuckled, a low, sinister sound. "Is that so? You don't appreciate it?" He repeated her words, mocking her with a derisive tone. "Well, guess what, ma'am? What you appreciate isn't my concern. My concern is that you're acting suspicious, and I don't like that." Jessica raised her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "Sitting on a park bench, reading a book, is suspicious to you?" "Maybe," he said, shrugging. "It's not what you're doing, it's the attitude." He jabbed a finger toward her, his eyes darkening. "People with nothing to hide don't usually give this much lip. Maybe there's more going on here than just a quiet afternoon, huh?" Jessica's stomach twisted with a mixture of frustration and fear. She looked around, hoping someone might notice what was happening, but people seemed to avoid her gaze, as if uncomfortable with what they saw. It felt as though she was invisible, her discomfort lost amidst the indifference of the crowd. "Officer Carter," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady, "I have every right to be here, just like anyone else. Unless you have a valid reason for questioning me, I'd like to enjoy my afternoon in peace." He sneered, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "Peace, huh? I'm not sure people like you understand that word." She felt her throat tighten, her heart pounding. "People like me," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. The implication in his words stung, and she struggled to hide the pain in her expression. He tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Oh, you know exactly what I mean. Always think you're above the rules, think you can do what you want, act however you want, and expect no consequences. Well, I'm here to remind you that people like you don't get to make the rules." Jessica felt her blood run cold. She knew she had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being belittled, spoken down to as if she were guilty of something she couldn't even comprehend. For a moment, she said nothing, choosing instead to keep her expression composed. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of knowing he had rattled her. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm, but her words emerged with a determined edge. "Officer, I don't know what issue you have with me, but it's clear that I haven't done anything to warrant this level of scrutiny. So, unless you're here to provide a legitimate reason, I suggest you leave me alone." Carter's smirk faded, his expression hardening into one of pure disdain. "Or what?" he taunted. "Are you gonna call for help? Scream? Let me tell you something, sweetheart. No one here cares. They'll look the other way, because they know better than to get involved." His words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Jessica felt an overwhelming sense of isolation, as if the park around her had somehow closed in, leaving her alone with this man who seemed intent on stripping away every ounce of her dignity. But then, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Jessica's heart soared with relief. She looked over Carter's shoulder to see Tom, his tall figure and calm presence exuding a quiet strength. His sharp gaze fixed on Carter, assessing him with a level of intensity that Jessica recognized well. Carter turned, momentarily thrown off balance by Tom's unexpected arrival. He straightened up, forcing a stiff, professional expression onto his face. "No problem here, sir," he said, though his voice lacked the confidence it held just moments before. Tom's eyes narrowed slightly, his jaw clenched. "Good to hear. I'd hate to think my wife was being harassed without reason. Carter's eyes flicked between Jessica and Tom, a faint glint of confusion crossing his face. Your wife? He repeated, his tone wary. That's right, Tom replied, stepping closer until he was standing shoulder to shoulder with Jessica. His gaze remained fixed on Carter, unwavering, and from where I'm standing, it seems like she was receiving some unwanted attention. Jessica could feel the shift in Carter's demeanor. His posture had stiffened, and his eyes darted to the badge on Tom's hip, a subtle but unmistakable indicator of Tom's FBI affiliation. Recognition dawned on Carter's face, and his confidence wavered, though he quickly tried to mask it. Just doing my job, sir, Carter replied, his voice quieter now. We have to make sure the area stays safe. Tom's gaze hardened. Safe from a woman reading a book on a park bench? His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it that Jessica recognized well. Tom rarely raised his voice, but his presence alone often carried more weight than words ever could. Carter's face flushed. Well, she was acting defensive, he stammered, grasping for an excuse. Defensive? Tom echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. Or perhaps she was being reasonable in the face of unwarranted suspicion. Jessica watched as Carter's confidence faltered further, his attempts to justify himself growing weaker. She felt a surge of relief knowing Tom was by her side, his strength lending her the courage she had struggled to maintain alone. Look, I didn't mean any offense, Carter mumbled, his gaze dropping to the ground. Just trying to do my job. Tom took a step forward, his voice low but resolute. The next time you decide to do your job, I suggest you remember that respect goes both ways, officer. Carter swallowed, nodding stiffly. Understood, sir. Without another word, Tom turned to Jessica, his expression softening as he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. She could feel the tension melting away, replaced by the comfort of his touch. Let's go, he said gently, guiding her away from the scene. As they walked, Jessica could still feel the intensity of Carter's gaze on them, but for the first time that afternoon, she felt safe. Tom's presence had transformed the entire atmosphere, and as they moved away from the confrontation, she allowed herself a small, grateful smile. As they left the park, Jessica's mind raced with a mixture of relief and lingering discomfort. Tom's hand was warm on her shoulder, steadying her, but she could feel her pulse still elevated from the tension of the confrontation. The air felt heavy, as if the intensity of Carter's gaze had followed them long after they'd turned their backs. She wanted to speak, to voice the jumble of emotions swirling within her, but the words seemed caught in her throat. Finally, Tom broke the silence. Jessica, he said softly, his tone filled with concern. Are you okay? Jessica nodded, though her voice wavered. I don't know, Tom. I felt so helpless back there. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but he just kept pushing, as if he was waiting for me to break. Tom's face darkened, his jaw set in a hard line. That kind of behavior is unacceptable. Abuse of power, plain and simple. He took a deep breath, the intensity in his eyes softening as he looked at her. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Jessica leaned into his embrace, grateful for his presence. Thank you for stepping in, Tom. I was holding my ground, but when he started talking down to me, it felt like no one cared. Like I didn't matter. Tom's arm tightened around her protectively. You do matter, Jessica, and he had no right to treat you that way. Just then, a voice called out from behind them. They both turned to see Officer Carter striding toward them, his expression a mixture of frustration and defiance. Jessica's stomach twisted with a renewed sense of dread. Excuse me, Carter called, his voice sharp. Just where do you think you're going? Tom's expression turned to steel. He took a step forward, positioning himself between Jessica and Carter. Is there something else we can help you with, Officer Carter? Tom's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge, a warning that Carter seemed to either ignore or deliberately provoke. Carter stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on Tom. As a matter of fact, there is. You might think you can just walk away, but this is still my jurisdiction, and I don't appreciate civilians thinking they can undermine my authority. Tom raised an eyebrow, unamused. Undermine your authority? By standing up to harassment? Carter's face flushed, his jaw clenching. Watch your tone. I don't care who you think you are, but you're in my territory, and I have every right to question suspicious behavior. Tom's expression remained calm, though Jessica could feel the tension radiating from him. Suspicious behavior? He repeated, his voice incredulous. A woman sitting on a bench in a public park, reading a book, is suspicious to you? Carter's mouth tightened, his eyes narrowing. Her attitude was suspicious, acting all high and mighty, refusing to cooperate. His gaze shifted to Jessica, cold and unforgiving. People who don't respect authority usually have something to hide. Jessica felt her anger rise, a wave of indignation bubbling up. She stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Respect is earned, Officer Carter, not demanded. And you've done nothing to earn mine. Carter's expression twisted into a sneer. Is that so? Well, let me tell you something, ma'am. People like you think you're above the rules. But I'm here to remind you that you're not. People like me? Jessica's voice was low, a quiet challenge. She held his gaze, refusing to back down, despite the way her heart pounded in her chest. Carter smirked, a condescending look in his eyes. You know exactly what I mean. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jessica's hands clenched into fists at her sides, the weight of his judgment pressing down on her. But before she could respond, Tom stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. That's enough, he said, his tone firm. You're out of line, Officer Carter. Carter's eyes flashed with defiance. Out of line? You don't get to decide that, pal. This is my beat, and I'll decide what's out of line. Tom's expression remained unreadable, though his voice took on a colder edge. Actually, I do. My name is Agent Tom Daniels, FBI. And as far as I can see, your actions here are a violation of the conduct expected from a law enforcement officer. For a split second, a flicker of panic crossed Carter's face, quickly replaced by a mask of indignant anger. He forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. Oh, so you think you're big time, huh? Think you can just throw that badge around and scare me off? Tom met his gaze steadily. I don't need to scare you off, officer. I just need you to understand that this isn't how we operate. Using your position to intimidate civilians is a misuse of power. Carter bristled, his fists clenching. Don't you lecture me about power. You think just because you're FBI, you're above the law? Tom's eyes narrowed. On the contrary, I'm accountable to the law, which is why I won't tolerate watching someone abuse it. Consider this a warning. The word warning seemed to hit Carter like a physical blow. His face reddened, and his stance stiffened, anger flashing in his eyes. But he seemed momentarily at a loss for words, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to compose himself. Finally, he managed to spit out, You don't get to just come in here and tell me how to do my job. Tom's voice was icy. I'm not telling you how to do your job, officer. I'm telling you not to overstep your bounds. I'm well aware of the responsibilities that come with a badge. And so should you, Carter sneered, though the confidence in his expression had visibly cracked. Yeah? Well, maybe you should remember that you're not on some high and mighty pedestal here. Out here, we don't take orders from desk jockeys. Jessica couldn't hold back any longer. Officer Carter, she said, her voice filled with controlled anger. If you truly believe in protecting this community, then perhaps you should focus on doing your job with integrity, rather than intimidating innocent people. Carter's gaze shifted back to her, a twisted smile forming on his face. Oh, I see. You've got some nerve lecturing me on integrity. What do you know about it? Jessica took a steadying breath, her voice calm but resolute. I know that respect isn't something you get to force out of people. It's earned through actions, through honesty. But from the way you've acted today, you don't seem to understand that concept. Carter scoffed, but she could see the discomfort in his eyes, a crack in the facade he wore so tightly. You're really pushing it, you know that, he said, his tone dripping with barely concealed fury. Tom stepped forward, his voice steady and final. I think we're done here, Officer Carter. You've made your point. Now let us leave. Carter stared at them, the rage simmering beneath the surface. He looked as if he wanted to argue further, but something in Tom's gaze held him back. With a reluctant sneer, he took a step back, his posture rigid. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice low. "I'll be watching." Tom's eyes remained fixed on him, unblinking. "Do what you need to, officer. But remember, your actions have consequences." Without another word, Carter turned on his heel and strode off, his shoulders tense, his fists clenched at his sides. Jessica watched him go, feeling the weight of the encounter settle over her. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her body feeling drained from the emotional toll. Tom placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Jessica nodded slowly, though the experience had left a lingering unease. "I am now. Thank you, Tom." He gave her a reassuring smile. "I'm just sorry you had to go through that. People like him shouldn't be in positions of authority." Jessica nodded, still processing everything. "I just don't understand why he acted that way. I wasn't doing anything wrong." Tom sighed, his voice tinged with frustration. "Sometimes it's not about what you're doing. Some people, they abuse their power because they can. But that doesn't make it right." As they walked away from the park, Jessica leaned into Tom's side, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Though the confrontation was over, the weight of the experience lingered, a reminder of the cruelty some people wielded without remorse. Jessica and Tom walked in silence, each absorbed in the aftermath of their confrontation with Officer Carter. The city around them buzzed with life. Cars zipped by, children laughed in the nearby playground, and people moved past in oblivious haste. But for Jessica, the world felt muted, as if the echoes of Carter's words were still vibrating in the air. After a few minutes, they reached a quiet cafe on the corner. Tom held the door open for her, and she stepped inside, grateful for the cozy warmth and the soft hum of chatter that filled the room. They found a small table near the window, and as they settled down, Jessica took a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly seep from her body. Tom watched her carefully, his gaze steady and filled with concern. "Jessica," he began, his voice gentle, "you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But I'm here to listen." Jessica managed a small smile, appreciating his sensitivity. "No, I think I need to get it out," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, I can't shake the feeling of how powerless I felt. I've never had anyone talk to me like that before." Tom nodded, leaning forward, his hands resting on the table between them. "I understand. Carter went out of his way to make you feel small, to strip away your dignity. That's what people like him do. They target others to feel powerful themselves." Jessica wrapped her hands around the cup of tea she had ordered, the warmth grounding her. "But why, Tom?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "What did I do that made him see me as a threat?" Tom sighed, his gaze darkening as he thought. "Jessica, you didn't do anything wrong. Some people, like Carter, have a twisted view of power. They assume that just because they have authority, they're entitled to treat others however they want." He hesitated, then added, "It's likely he saw you as someone he could intimidate without repercussions. It's not about you. It's about his insecurities, his need to control." Jessica looked down at her tea, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup as she absorbed his words. "I keep thinking, what if you hadn't been there, Tom? Would he have stopped? Or would he have kept pushing until I broke?" Her voice wavered, a flicker of fear crossing her face. Tom reached across the table, covering her hand with his own. "Hey," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. "I don't want you to worry about that. I'm here now, and I'll always be here for you. We'll get through this together." Jessica squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his words. "Thank you," she whispered, the warmth in his gaze steadying her frayed nerves. Just then, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Tom's old friend and fellow FBI agent, Mike. He was tall, with a kind smile that quickly faded as he took in Jessica's expression and the tense atmosphere at their table. "Hey, Tom, Jessica," Mike greeted them, his voice cautious. "Am I interrupting something?" Tom shook his head, gesturing for Mike to sit. Actually, Mike, you might want to hear this, he said, casting a concerned glance at Jessica. We just had a run-in with a rather aggressive police officer, Officer Carter. Mike's eyebrows shot up, and he settled into the chair, his expression serious. Carter? Oh, I know him by reputation. Not exactly a model cop, if you ask me. Heard he's got a bit of a superiority complex. He turned to Jessica, his gaze softening. Are you okay? What happened? Jessica took a shaky breath, recounting the encounter with Carter, the way he had scrutinized her, his condescending remarks, and his attempts to undermine her confidence. She described how he had insulted her, implying she wasn't above the rules, and how he dismissed her every attempt to stand her ground. Mike listened intently, his face hardening with each detail. Unbelievable, he muttered, shaking his head. This guy's got a badge, but he's using it as a weapon, not as a responsibility. You shouldn't have to go through that, Jessica. Jessica nodded, her shoulders sagging with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Thank you, Mike. It was so humiliating. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but he made me feel like I was guilty of something. Mike reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Listen, Jessica, you're not alone. I've heard stories about Carter before, especially from people he's targeted in similar ways. He's got a track record of going after people he thinks won't fight back. Tom's gaze sharpened. And yet he's still on the force, he said, his voice filled with frustration. People like him make it hard for the rest of us. For every officer who actually believes in protecting and serving, Mike sighed. You're right. Unfortunately, there are officers who slip through the cracks. They know how to keep their misconduct just under the radar, so it's hard to pin anything on them. Jessica looked up, a determined light in her eyes. Then maybe it's time someone did something about it, she said, her voice stronger now. If he's gotten away with this kind of behavior before, he's bound to do it again. And next time, it could be worse. Tom nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right, Jessica. We can't just let this slide. He turned to Mike, his expression resolute. What do you think, Mike? Is there anything we can do? Mike hesitated, a cautious look crossing his face. It's tricky, he admitted. The department is tight-knit, and there's a lot of red tape. But if enough complaints come in, if there's enough evidence of his misconduct, it could trigger an investigation. It would take time, and we'd need more than just this one encounter. Jessica's jaw tightened, a spark of determination lighting her gaze. Then let's find that evidence. If he's hurt other people, there must be records, complaints, something. Tom exchanged a look with Mike, who nodded slowly. All right, Mike said, his voice steady. I'll ask around. Discreetly, of course. If there's anything concrete, we'll find it. And if we do, maybe we can start building a case. Jessica felt a surge of hope, a small but meaningful glimmer that things might change. She looked at Tom, her expression one of gratitude. Thank you, both of you. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. Mike smiled gently. It's the least we can do. And if Carter thinks he can keep getting away with this, well, he's in for a surprise. As they sat together, discussing ways to proceed, Jessica felt the weight of her experience begin to lift, replaced by a newfound resolve. The quiet cafe around them buzzed with life, but in that moment, she felt a rare sense of unity and purpose. She leaned over to Tom, her voice soft. You know, I almost lost hope back there, but having you by my side, it reminded me that I don't have to face things like this alone. Tom squeezed her hand, his gaze filled with warmth. You're never alone, Jessica. Not as long as I'm here. Jessica smiled, feeling the last remnants of her fear dissolve into something stronger, a fierce determination to see justice done. With Tom and Mike's support, she knew they'd face whatever lay ahead together. As the days passed, Jessica found it challenging to shake off the memory of Carter's intimidation. Every time she tried to focus on her work or daily activities, flashes of his sneering face would surface, and her stomach would churn with anger and frustration. The confrontation had left a mark on her, one that seemed determined to linger. One afternoon, as she was leaving her office, she felt a distinct chill in the air. Glancing around, she noticed an all-too-familiar figure across the street, leaning casually against his patrol car. Officer Carter. Her heart skipped a beat, a sharp pang of dread settling in her chest. She knew it was more than a coincidence. He was there deliberately. Taking a deep breath, she started walking towards her car, refusing to let him see her fear. But before she could reach her vehicle, Carter had crossed the street, his heavy steps echoing against the pavement. Jessica felt her pulse quicken as he closed the distance, a smug look on his face. "Hello again," Carter drawled, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "Fancy running into you here." Jessica forced herself to keep her composure, though her insides felt like they were twisting in knots. "Officer Carter," she replied, her voice steady, though her mind raced. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged, looking around as if inspecting the surroundings. "Just doing my rounds," he said, feigning innocence. "Can't a man do his job without being questioned?" She took a step back, feeling the urge to put distance between them. "Your rounds?" she repeated, her tone skeptical. "This isn't your usual patrol area, is it?" Carter's eyes flashed, a hint of irritation slipping through his smug demeanor. "I go wherever I'm needed," he replied curtly, taking a step closer. "You know, you seem awfully nervous, Jessica. Almost like you've got something to hide." Jessica's jaw clenched. She looked him straight in the eye, unwilling to let him intimidate her. "The only thing I'm hiding, Officer Carter, is my disgust for how you treat people." He let out a cold laugh, crossing his arms as he stared her down. "Disgust? That's rich. You think you can just go around talking like that to an officer of the law?" Jessica felt her hands tighten into fists at her sides, her patience wearing thin. "Officer of the law?" she retorted, her voice edged with defiance. "You use your badge to bully people. You're no officer. You're just a man with a badge and an ego." Carter's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Watch your mouth, Jessica. I could make things very uncomfortable for you." Jessica's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "Are you threatening me, Officer Carter?" He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Consider it a warning. People like you don't get to talk down to me without consequences." The words sent a chill down her spine, but Jessica refused to back down. She looked him in the eye, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you, Carter. And sooner or later, someone is going to hold you accountable." He sneered, leaning in until their faces were just inches apart. "We'll see about that," he murmured, his eyes filled with cold contempt. "Just remember, people like me, we don't go down without a fight." Just then, she heard footsteps approaching, and she turned to see Tom striding toward them, his face set in a hard line. Relief flooded her as he reached her side, his presence like a shield between her and Carter. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Tom asked, his tone calm but unyielding. Carter's sneer faded, replaced by a look of irritation. "No problem at all," he replied, though his eyes betrayed his annoyance. "Just a friendly chat with your wife." "Friendly?" Tom echoed, his voice carrying a hint of disbelief. "It didn't look that way to me." Carter straightened, his posture defensive. "I don't need your permission to do my job, Agent Daniels," he said, the emphasis on Tom's title dripping with sarcasm. Tom's expression didn't waver. "And I don't need to remind you, Officer Carter, that your badge doesn't give you the right to harass citizens." Carter's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched as he looked between Tom and Jessica. "Harassment?" he repeated, feigning innocence. "I was just making sure everything was in order." Tom's gaze hardened, his voice growing colder. "I'm warning you, Carter. If I catch you crossing the line with Jessica or anyone else again, I will take action." Carter let out a bitter laugh. "Take action? You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Just because you work for the FBI, you think you can waltz in and tell everyone what to do?" Tom didn't flinch, his gaze steady. "I don't think I'm a hero, Carter. I think I'm a man who respects the law and the people I'm supposed to protect. And if that's something you can't understand, then maybe you're in the wrong line of work." Carter's sneer deepened, but he seemed at a loss for words. For a moment, he simply glared at them, his fists clenched at his sides. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy against the pavement. Jessica let out a shaky breath, feeling the tension drain from her as Carter disappeared around the corner. She turned to Tom, her face a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tom wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I'll always be here for you, Jessica, and I won't let him, or anyone else, make you feel powerless." Jessica nodded, her head resting on his shoulder as she tried to steady her breathing. But despite Tom's reassurance, a nagging worry tugged at the edges of her mind. She knew Carter wouldn't just walk away without a fight. He had a vendetta now, and she couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from over. As the days passed, Jessica struggled to regain her sense of normalcy. Despite Tom's reassurance, the looming shadow of Carter's harassment lingered in her mind. She felt trapped, her sense of safety shattered in places that once felt familiar. The slightest sound, a car engine, heavy footsteps, could trigger a wave of anxiety, leaving her pulse racing and her hands shaking. One evening, as she sat with Tom in their living room, Jessica finally voiced the thoughts that had been gnawing at her. The soft glow of a lamp cast warm light around the room, yet she felt a chill deep within her, a coldness she couldn't shake. "Tom," she began, her voice hesitant, "I can't stop thinking about Carter. Everywhere I go, it's like I can feel him watching, waiting." She paused, her hands nervously twisting the edge of the blanket draped over her lap. "I hate that I feel this way, like I'm powerless." Tom put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Jessica, you're not powerless. What he's doing is wrong, and it won't go unchecked. We're building a case, remember? Mike is digging into his records, and soon enough, we'll have enough evidence to make him face the consequences." Jessica leaned into his embrace, but her expression remained troubled. "But what if he finds out? What if this investigation just makes things worse? He doesn't strike me as the kind of person who gives up easily." Tom's face grew serious, his brow furrowing as he considered her words. "I know, and that's why we're taking every precaution. We're not going to let him intimidate you, or anyone else, into silence." Jessica sighed, her gaze distant. "I've never felt like this before, Tom. I always thought I was strong, that I could handle anything. But Carter," she hesitated, her voice barely a whisper, "he makes me feel so small." Tom took her hands in his gaze steady and filled with warmth. "Jessica, your strength isn't defined by one man's attempt to tear you down. Strength is standing up, even when it's hard, even when it feels like the world is against you." Jessica looked into his eyes, searching for comfort. "But what if he doesn't stop? What if he comes after me again? Or worse, what if he tries to go after you?" Tom's expression softened, and he leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "If he does, then we'll face it together. But I promise you, Jessica, I won't let him touch you. I'll protect you no matter what." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she quickly brushed it away, feeling vulnerable and exposed. "I just don't understand why he targeted me. I was just sitting in the park, minding my own business." Tom placed a hand on her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away her tear. "People like Carter don't need a reason, Jess. They find weakness where there is none. They thrive on intimidation. But the fact that you're still here, still fighting," his voice grew softer, a hint of pride in his tone, "that says more about your strength than anything he could ever try to take away." Jessica felt a flicker of resolve reignite within her. "You're right," she murmured, her voice steadier. "I can't let him win. I won't let him win." Just then, there was a knock at the door. Tom and Jessica exchanged a wary glance, both feeling a surge of unease. Tom rose to answer it, glancing through the peephole before pulling open the door. To Jessica's surprise, Mike stood on the other side, his expression grave. He entered, nodding to Tom before turning to Jessica, his demeanor serious. "Jessica, Tom, I came as soon as I could. There's something you both need to know." Jessica's stomach tightened as she looked up at him, feeling a knot of anxiety. "Is it about Carter?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike nodded, his expression grim. "We found something, records of complaints filed against him over the years. He's had numerous allegations of misconduct, but every single one of them was either dismissed or buried. Tom's jaw tightened, his voice laced with frustration. So he's been getting away with this for years? Mike sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Unfortunately, yes. The problem is, he's careful. He targets people who don't have the resources or the connections to fight back. And even when complaints were made, they were always dismissed as unsubstantiated due to lack of evidence. Jessica's hands clenched into fists, anger simmering within her. So, he's been doing this, knowing that no one would stand up to him. Mike nodded, his expression sympathetic. I know it's infuriating, Jessica, but now that we're aware, we can make sure he doesn't get away with it this time. We'll document everything, keep a record of every encounter. This time, he won't be able to bury it. Jessica looked down, her voice heavy with resignation. But that means I'll have to face him again, doesn't it? Tom reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Only if you're ready, Jessica. We'll take it one step at a time. You're not in this alone. Mike gave her an encouraging nod. And if he does try anything, you have us. We'll make sure he's held accountable, one way or another. Jessica took a deep breath, letting their words settle over her. She felt a surge of determination, a renewed sense of purpose. Thank you, both of you. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. If facing him means stopping him, then I'm ready. Tom looked at her with pride, his voice filled with warmth. That's my Jessica. Strong, resilient, and never backing down. A faint smile crossed her lips, and for the first time since the encounter with Carter, she felt a glimmer of hope. As they sat together, a sense of unity filled the room, binding them in their shared resolve. Whatever lay ahead, Jessica knew they would face it together. The following week, Jessica felt a small but growing sense of optimism as she went about her daily life. Knowing that Tom and Mike were actively working on a case against Carter provided her with a much-needed sense of security. She hadn't seen him in several days, and the thought that perhaps he'd finally backed off gave her a glimmer of hope. One evening, after a long day at work, Jessica met Tom and Mike at a small diner to discuss their progress. The atmosphere was relaxed, and a sense of anticipation hung between them as they settled into the booth. Mike took a sip of his coffee, his gaze shifting from Tom to Jessica with a faint smile. "We've got some good news, Jessica," he began. "We managed to dig up more information on Carter. A few of his past victims have come forward, willing to testify if needed." Jessica felt a surge of relief, her eyes widening. "They're willing to speak up?" Mike nodded. "Yes. Most of them were initially reluctant, but once they knew someone else was taking action, it gave them the courage to come forward." Tom placed a reassuring hand over hers. "See, Jess, you're not alone in this. Your courage has inspired others to stand up as well." Jessica smiled, a mix of gratitude and determination in her eyes. "I just want him to know that he can't keep doing this, that he can't keep using his badge to bully people." Mike's expression grew serious as he leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "And he won't, Jessica. We're putting together a solid case against him. It's going to take time, but we're getting there." Jessica looked between the two of them, feeling a warmth that eased the weight she had been carrying. "Thank you, both of you. I don't know what I'd do without your support." Tom gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You'd be just as strong as you are now, Jess. We're just here to make sure you don't have to go through this alone." They continued talking, the conversation drifting to lighter topics as they enjoyed their meal. For the first time in weeks, Jessica felt as though a cloud had lifted. She laughed at a story Mike told about an undercover operation gone wrong, the three of them sharing in the humor and camaraderie that came naturally after years of friendship. As they left the diner, Jessica felt lighter, almost as if the tension of the past few weeks was finally beginning to fade. She walked arm in arm with Tom, feeling secure and grateful for his unwavering support. The streetlights cast a warm glow on the sidewalk, and the city's distant hum created a sense of calm that enveloped them. But as they rounded the corner, Jessica's heart stopped. Standing there, leaning against a lamppost, was Officer Carter, his face twisted into a smirk that sent a chill down her spine. She froze, her hand tightening around Tom's arm as her newfound sense of peace evaporated. Tom noticed her reaction immediately, his gaze following hers to where Carter stood. His jaw clenched, and he took a step forward, positioning himself protectively in front of Jessica. "Carter," he said, his voice low and warning. Carter straightened, his smirk widening. "Agent Daniels." "Jessica, fancy running into you two here." Jessica felt her stomach churn, a cold wave of dread washing over her. "What do you want, Carter?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. He shrugged, feigning innocence. "Just out for a stroll. Can't a man enjoy his evening without being questioned?" Tom's eyes narrowed. "Not when that man has a history of harassing my wife." Carter raised an eyebrow, his expression dripping with mock surprise. "Harassing? Oh, come on. I was just doing my job, making sure everything was in order." His gaze shifted to Jessica, his eyes glinting with malice. "Can't help it if some people get a little sensitive." Jessica felt her anger rise, her hands balling into fists. "This isn't about sensitivity, Carter. It's about you using your position to intimidate people." Carter's smirk deepened, and he took a casual step closer, his tone dripping with condescension. "Intimidation? Now, that's a big word, Jessica. Maybe you should learn a little respect. After all, you're the one who seems to have a problem following simple instructions." Jessica's face flushed with frustration, but before she could respond, Tom stepped in, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Enough, Carter. Whatever grudge you have, let it go. We're not playing your game." Carter chuckled, crossing his arms as he looked Tom up and down. "Grudge? Now, that's interesting. You think I'm holding a grudge just because I like to make sure people like you two don't get too comfortable?" Jessica felt a surge of anger, her patience worn thin. "People like us?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "What does that even mean, Carter?" Carter leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "It means people who think they can walk all over others just because they've got a little backup. But you'll see, Jessica, you're not untouchable." Tom's face darkened, his body tensing as he took another step forward, putting himself squarely between Carter and Jessica. "I think you've said enough, Carter," he said, his voice filled with quiet fury. "If you come near my wife again, I'll make sure there's a full investigation into every complaint you've ever had. Do you understand me?" Carter's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. "Is that a threat, Agent Daniels? Because I'd hate to see you abuse your position. It wouldn't look good for the Bureau, now would it?" Tom's voice was ice cold. "This isn't a threat, Carter. It's a promise." For a tense moment, they stood in silence, the air charged with unspoken hostility. Jessica's heart pounded, her fear mixing with a fierce determination to stand her ground. She refused to let Carter see her shaken, even as every instinct screamed at her to walk away. Finally, Carter let out a low, mocking laugh. "Well, isn't this cozy?" he drawled, his gaze shifting between them. "But remember this, you can't keep an eye on her forever, Agent Daniels. There's always a moment when people like you slip up." Jessica felt a surge of anger, stepping forward despite Tom's protective stance. "You're the one who's going to slip up, Carter," she said, her voice steady and filled with defiance. "And when you do, I'll be there to make sure you face the consequences." Carter's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of cold anger. He took a step back, his eyes glinting with barely concealed malice. "We'll see about that," he murmured, his tone a dark promise. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the empty street. Jessica watched him go, feeling a mixture of fear and relief as his figure disappeared into the shadows. Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice soft. "Are you all right, Jess?" Jessica took a shaky breath, nodding. "I am now," she replied, though her voice was laced with uncertainty. "But he's not going to stop, is he?" Tom's gaze was steady, filled with determination. "No, he's not. But neither are we. We'll keep pushing until he has no choice but to answer for his actions." Jessica looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and resolve. "Thank you, Tom, for standing by me, for everything." He pulled her close, his voice filled with warmth. "I'll always stand by you, Jessica, no matter what." As they walked away, hand in hand, Jessica felt a renewed sense of strength. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but with Tom by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges came their way. The encounter with Carter left Jessica feeling drained and on edge. Each passing day seemed to deepen her unease, a constant reminder that Carter's harassment wasn't just a one-time event. It was becoming personal. Despite Tom and Mike's reassurances, she could feel Carter closing in, pushing her closer to a breaking point. One evening, as Jessica sat in her office, she glanced at the clock and realized she had stayed later than usual. The building was nearly empty, the quiet only amplifying her sense of vulnerability. She decided to leave, gathering her things with haste. But as she made her way toward the elevator, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing in the corridor behind her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickened her pace, glancing over her shoulder. There, walking toward her with a slow, deliberate stride, was Carter. He wore a smug, unsettling grin that made her blood run cold. Jessica stopped, forcing herself to steady her breathing as he closed the distance. "Is there something you need, Officer Carter?" she asked, her voice carefully measured. Carter let out a low chuckle, his gaze sweeping over her with casual contempt. "Just making sure everything's all right here," he said, feigning innocence. "Wouldn't want you to feel unsafe, now, would we?" Jessica's jaw tightened. "If you're concerned about my safety, officer, then I suggest you leave. Your presence here is anything but comforting." Carter tilted his head, his smile widening. "Comforting?" he echoed mockingly. "Comfort isn't exactly what I'm here for, Jessica. See, I think you and I have some unfinished business." Jessica's hands clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Unfinished business? I think you're mistaken. This harassment ends now, Carter." He raised an eyebrow, a smirk dancing on his lips. "Harassment? I don't think you know the meaning of the word." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "But I could teach you if you'd like." The words sent a shiver down Jessica's spine, but she stood her ground. "You're making a mistake, Carter. Whatever grudge you have against me, it won't end well for you. You're abusing your power, and people are watching." Carter's face twisted into a sneer. "Watching?" he repeated, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Do you really think anyone cares? People like me, we don't get caught, Jessica. We know how to stay out of trouble, unlike people like you." Jessica's voice shook with barely concealed anger. "People like me? You mean people who won't just sit back and let you treat them like garbage?" He chuckled, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Exactly. You see, Jessica, I've been in this game a long time. I know how to make problems disappear. And you?" He leaned in close, his breath hot against her skin. "You're just another problem." The threat hung in the air, thick and menacing. Jessica fought to keep her composure, but fear crept in, tightening her chest. She knew she couldn't let him see her shaken, yet she felt as if her strength was slipping. But just as she opened her mouth to respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Step away from her, Carter." Both Jessica and Carter turned to see Tom standing at the end of the hallway, his expression hard and unyielding. His fists were clenched at his sides, his stance rigid with barely contained anger. He took a few purposeful steps forward, his gaze locked on Carter. Carter's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, straightening up. "Agent Daniels," he greeted, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Didn't realize you'd be joining us." Tom's jaw clenched as he took his place beside Jessica, his presence like a barrier between her and Carter. "I won't say it again, Carter. Step away." Carter scoffed, rolling his eyes. "What's the matter, Daniels? Can't handle your little wife being alone for 5 minutes?" Tom's face darkened, his voice a low growl. "This has nothing to do with me, and everything to do with your complete disregard for the law you're supposed to uphold. You're crossing lines, Carter. Dangerous lines." Carter let out a derisive laugh, crossing his arms. "Lines? You think I'm the only one crossing lines here? Please, Daniels, spare me the righteous act." Jessica felt the tension between the two men crackling in the air, a charged silence filling the corridor. She could sense Carter's fury, his need to assert control, but Tom's presence seemed to challenge his authority in a way that clearly infuriated him. "You think you're invincible, don't you?" Carter sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Just because you've got the FBI backing you up, you think you can march in here and act like you're better than the rest of us?" Tom's gaze was steely, his tone calm but edged with a quiet fury. "No, Carter, I don't think I'm better, but I do know the difference between right and wrong. And what you're doing, it's wrong." Carter took a step closer, his voice low and filled with venom. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Daniels. You think you can just walk into my life and throw around accusations? You're making a big mistake." Tom didn't flinch, his gaze unwavering. "The only mistake here, Carter, is you thinking you're above accountability. That badge you're so proud of? It doesn't give you the right to threaten and intimidate people." Carter's smirk twisted into a scowl, his eyes glinting with a dangerous intensity. "You don't know anything about me, Daniels. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've done to get where I am." Jessica, who had been silent until now, felt a surge of anger rise within her. "And what exactly have you done, Carter?" she demanded, her voice trembling with defiance. "Made people miserable? Used your position to tear others down? If that's what you've sacrificed, then you're no better than a bully." Carter's expression hardened, and he stepped forward, his gaze burning into hers. "You think you know me?" he snarled, his voice a menacing hiss. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." Tom stepped between them, his voice deadly calm. "Back off, Carter. Now." For a tense moment, Carter held Tom's gaze, his fists clenching at his sides. The silence stretched, heavy and loaded, until finally, Carter took a step back, his expression filled with disdain. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice a dark promise. "You'll both regret this." Tom's voice was cold, final. "The only one who's going to regret anything is you, Carter. Leave Jessica alone, or I'll make sure every department in this city knows what kind of man you are." Carter glared at him, his face twisted with barely contained rage. "We'll see, Daniels. We'll see." With one last, menacing look at Jessica, he turned on his heel and strode down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Jessica let out a shaky breath, feeling the tension drain from her as Carter disappeared from view. She turned to Tom, her hands trembling as she clutched his arm. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "You don't have to face him alone, Jess. I'm here, and I won't let him hurt you." Jessica nodded, swallowing back the fear that lingered in her chest. I just want this to end. I want him to leave us alone." Tom took her hand, his expression filled with resolve. "And he will. We're getting closer to holding him accountable. He knows it. That's why he's escalating. But it only means we're winning." Jessica managed a small, hopeful smile. "I hope you're right, Tom. I really do." As they left the building together, Jessica felt a faint glimmer of strength returning. She knew the fight was far from over, but with Tom by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The following weekend, Jessica and Tom tried to enjoy a rare day off together. They had planned a quiet morning at home, hoping to shake off the lingering tension of the past few days. Yet, despite their attempts to relax, Jessica's mind was constantly pulled back to Carter's threats and the unsettling encounters that seemed to follow her every step. Tom noticed her unease as they sipped their coffee on the back porch, surrounded by the peaceful morning sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. Jessica's fingers tapped absently on her coffee mug, her gaze distant, lost in thought. "Jessica," Tom said softly, reaching across the table to place a reassuring hand over hers. "You're still thinking about him, aren't you?" She blinked, drawn back to the present by his voice. She gave a small, tired smile. "I can't seem to help it. No matter what I do, he's there, in the back of my mind. It's like he's taken up space that I can't get back." Tom nodded, his face filled with empathy. I understand. He's done everything to make you feel that way. But that's exactly what he wants. To keep you on edge, to make you doubt yourself. Jessica sighed, looking down at her coffee. I hate that he's getting to me like this. I keep telling myself to be stronger, to push him out of my mind. But it's exhausting. Tom squeezed her hand, his voice gentle but firm. It's not about being strong enough, Jessica. You're already incredibly strong. But no one should have to face this alone. He's made it personal, and that's not something you just brush off. Jessica closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath. I know. I just wish it didn't affect every part of my life. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. I feel like I'm losing pieces of myself. My confidence, my peace. It's like he's taking them from me bit by bit. Tom's expression hardened, his protective instinct flaring. We're going to make sure he doesn't take anything else from you, Jess. I promise you that. At that moment, Jessica's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw her younger brother, Evan, was calling. She picked up, feeling a pang of worry as she answered. Hey, Evan, everything okay? On the other end of the line, Evan's voice was filled with concern. Jess, I don't want to alarm you, but someone's been asking around about you. Jessica's stomach dropped. She exchanged a tense glance with Tom, who leaned closer, his face etched with worry. What do you mean? Who's been asking about me? Evan hesitated, his voice filled with frustration. A cop. He came by my apartment yesterday. Started asking questions about you, about our family. I didn't like his attitude, Jess. He was aggressive. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. Evan, did he give you his name? Yeah, Evan replied, his voice laced with anger. Officer Carter. Jessica's grip on the phone tightened, her knuckles turning white. What did he say, Evan? Did he threaten you? Evan hesitated, his voice wavering slightly. He didn't outright threaten me, but he made it clear that he was just checking in. It was all in his tone. Jess, like he was looking for something, trying to get under my skin. Jessica took a deep breath, struggling to keep her voice steady. Evan, I'm so sorry. He's been harassing me for weeks. I didn't think he'd drag you into this. Tom's face darkened as he listened, his jaw clenched. He leaned in closer, whispering, Tell him we'll take care of this. Carter won't get away with it. Jessica nodded, relaying Tom's words to Evan. Evan, listen. Tom and I are handling it. He's been targeting me, but we're gathering evidence against him. You don't need to worry. Evan's voice softened, but Jessica could still hear the worry beneath it. Jess, just be careful, okay? This guy doesn't seem like he's playing around. I will, Evan. And thank you for telling me, she replied, trying to keep her voice strong. If he contacts you again, let me know immediately. After a few more words of reassurance, Jessica hung up, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at Tom, the fear evident in her eyes. He went to my brother, Tom. He's crossing every line. Tom reached out, pulling her into a tight embrace. He's desperate, Jess. He knows we're getting closer to exposing him, and he's trying to scare us into backing down. Jessica leaned into his arms, her voice muffled. But what if he doesn't stop? What if he keeps going after the people I care about? Tom stroked her hair, his voice filled with quiet determination. Then we'll make sure he faces the full consequences of his actions. He won't be able to hide forever. Jessica pulled back slightly, her eyes filled with resolve. We need to speed things up, Tom. If he's getting desperate enough to go after my family, he's not going to stop until he's forced to. Tom nodded, his expression grim. I'll talk to Mike again. We'll make sure every piece of evidence we have is rock solid. He can't ignore it if we bring the full weight of the law against him. Jessica took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I hate that it's come to this, all because of one man's twisted need for control. Tom placed a hand on her cheek, his gaze filled with warmth and conviction. We're going to end this, Jess. You have my word. Just then, Jessica's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message. She opened it, her heart sinking as she read the words. Stay out of my business, or your family will pay the price. Jessica felt her blood run cold. She showed the message to Tom, her hands shaking. Tom, he's threatening us. Tom's eyes hardened, his voice a low growl. That's it. He's crossed the line. This is no longer just harassment. It's a direct threat. Jessica felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. He's not just trying to scare us anymore. He's trying to control us, to make us submit. Tom took her hand, his voice filled with resolve. Then let's not give him that power, Jess. We're going to take this to the highest level if we have to. We'll make sure every single threat he's made is on record. Jessica nodded, the fire of determination igniting within her once again. I won't let him win, Tom. I won't let him take away my peace, my safety. I refuse to let him control my life. Tom's face softened, a small smile breaking through his serious expression. That's the Jessica I know. And remember, you're not in this alone. We're in this together, every step of the way. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Tom's words sink in, grounding her. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. For being here, for fighting with me. Tom squeezed her hand, his voice warm. Always, Jess. I wouldn't have it any other way. As they sat together, their resolve strengthened. Jessica knew that Carter's threats would not break them. They would face whatever he threw at them with courage, side by side, until justice was served. Later that evening, Jessica sat at her kitchen table, her phone resting in front of her as she waited for her mother, Laura, to answer. After everything that had happened with Carter's threats, she felt compelled to reach out to her family to reassure them and to let them know what was happening. But part of her dreaded the conversation. Her mother wasn't one to stay calm in the face of conflict, and Jessica knew this call might bring up old tensions. Finally, the line clicked, and Laura's familiar voice filled the room. Jessica, honey, I wasn't expecting your call. Is everything all right? Jessica forced a small smile, even though she knew her mother couldn't see it. Hi, Mom. I wanted to talk to you about something important. It's kind of serious. Laura's tone immediately shifted, her voice laced with concern. Serious? Jessica, what's going on? Is Tom all right? Are you all right? Jessica took a deep breath, steadying herself. We're both okay, Mom. It's this police officer. He's been harassing me. He's crossed several lines, and recently, he's even threatened me. And Evan, there was a moment of silence on the other end, and Jessica could almost hear the gears turning in her mother's mind. When Laura finally spoke, her voice was sharp, tinged with frustration. Jessica, are you telling me a police officer is harassing you? How did it get to this point? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Jessica felt a twinge of guilt. I didn't want to worry you, Mom. Tom and I have been handling it. We have someone from the FBI helping us gather evidence, and we're close to building a case. But things have escalated, and I thought you should know. Laura's voice rose in agitation. So you've been dealing with this all on your own? Jessica, this is exactly the kind of situation where family steps in. Why didn't you think we could help? Jessica pressed her hand against her forehead, feeling the familiar tension of their conversations. Mom, it's not that I don't think you can help. It's just, this is a delicate situation. Carter is dangerous. We have to be careful with every step. Laura let out a huff of frustration. And you thought keeping this from your family was the best solution? Jessica, you're my daughter. I can't believe you'd try to handle something like this without us. Jessica's voice grew firmer. Mom, I'm telling you now, aren't I? I just needed to make sure we had a plan before I involved everyone. This isn't just a difficult situation. It's a legal battle. We're doing everything we can to protect ourselves. Laura's tone softened slightly, but Jessica could still sense her mother's lingering disappointment. I know you're trying to handle it, Jessica, but if this man is as dangerous as you say, I don't understand why you wouldn't want every possible support around you. Jessica sighed, fighting to keep her patience. Mom, it's not about not wanting support. It's about making sure this doesn't spiral further out of control. Tom and I have a strategy, and we're working with someone who understands how to bring this kind of person to justice. Her mother's voice took on a disbelieving edge. And this so-called strategy involves keeping things secret? Jessica, I thought I raised you to be more open with your family. Jessica clenched her fists, the frustration building. Mom, this isn't about family loyalty. It's about keeping people safe. If Carter feels cornered, he could lash out. I can't have him going after you or anyone else. Laura fell silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was laced with hurt. So you think my involvement would make things worse? Jessica shook her head, feeling a pang of guilt. Mom, it's not like that. I didn't want to worry you until it was absolutely necessary. Laura's tone turned icy. Well, consider me worried now, Jessica. I don't understand why you think you can handle this alone. This is exactly the kind of thing that tears people apart. Families stay together through hardship. Jessica's patience finally snapped. Mom, please. I'm not handling this alone. Tom is here, and we have professional help. I don't need more people getting involved and complicating things. I told you because I care, not because I wanted more people to fight my battles. There was a long, tense silence, and Jessica could feel her mother's disapproval radiating through the phone. When Laura finally spoke, her voice was filled with cold resolve. Fine, I understand. Just keep me updated, will you? Or is that too much to ask? Jessica's shoulders slumped, the tension ebbing away, replaced by a pang of regret. I'll keep you updated, Mom. I promise. Laura's voice softened, though the hurt lingered. All right, just stay safe, honey. And remember, we're here if you need us. Jessica's voice softened as well. I know. Thank you, Mom. After they hung up, Jessica sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, a heavy feeling settling over her. She knew her mother meant well, but every conversation with her seemed to bring up old wounds, old expectations that Jessica had never been able to fully meet. Tom came into the kitchen, sensing her tension. How did it go? Jessica let out a shaky sigh. Not great. She doesn't understand why I didn't tell her sooner. And now she's hurt, thinking I don't trust her. Tom pulled a chair closer, sitting beside her. Family dynamics can be complicated, Jess. Your mom just wants to protect you. But she doesn't understand the risks we're dealing with here. Jessica nodded, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her coffee cup. I know she means well, but sometimes it feels like she's more focused on what she thinks I should do, rather than listening to what I need. Tom placed a comforting hand on her back, rubbing gentle circles. It's tough, but you're doing what's best for you, and for her, even if she doesn't see it that way. Jessica leaned into his touch, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. I just wish I didn't have to keep justifying my decisions. This is already so hard. I feel like I'm fighting battles on every front. Tom's expression softened, his gaze filled with understanding. You're carrying a lot, Jess, but you're not alone in this. And whether your mom understands it or not, we're doing the right thing. Jessica looked up, meeting his gaze. Thank you for always being here, Tom. I don't know how I'd get through this without you. He smiled, his hand warm and reassuring on her shoulder. You'd get through it because you're strong, Jess. But I'm glad I'm here to remind you of that. She managed a small, grateful smile, feeling a bit of the weight lift. Maybe I'll try talking to her again once this is all over. Maybe she'll understand better when she sees why I kept her at a distance. Tom nodded. And if she doesn't, that's on her. You're doing what's right for you, Jess. Sometimes that's all you can do. Jessica took a deep breath, letting his words settle over her, grounding her. You're right. I need to focus on the bigger picture here. We have a plan, and I have to trust that it's going to work. Tom gave her a reassuring squeeze. We'll get through this together, one step at a time. As Jessica looked around her kitchen, feeling the warmth of Tom's presence beside her, she felt a renewed sense of determination. The challenges she faced were immense, but with Tom by her side, she knew she had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. In the days that followed, Jessica tried to put the difficult conversation with her mother behind her. She focused on her work, her daily routines, and most importantly, on helping Tom and Mike strengthen their case against Carter. It was exhausting, but knowing she was actively taking steps to end his harassment gave her a renewed sense of purpose. One afternoon, Jessica received a call from Mike. His tone was unusually upbeat, a hint of excitement breaking through his typically composed demeanor. Jessica, You're going to want to hear this. Jessica felt a surge of curiosity and hope. What's going on, Mike? We've just uncovered a significant piece of evidence against Carter, he explained. There's a witness, a former colleague who left the force a few years ago. He's willing to come forward and testify about Carter's history of abuse and misconduct. Jessica felt her heart leap. Are you serious? This could be what we need to finally hold him accountable. Mike chuckled, clearly sharing her excitement. Exactly. And he's not just any witness. This guy was in Carter's unit, saw everything firsthand. He's credible, Jessica. If we can get his statement on record, Carter's days of unchecked power are numbered. Jessica's mind raced with the possibilities. After weeks of fear and intimidation, this news felt like a ray of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Mike, this is amazing. When can we talk to him? I'm meeting him tomorrow afternoon to get his statement, Mike replied. I'll keep you and Tom updated every step of the way. I think we're finally getting somewhere. Jessica felt a swell of gratitude and relief. Thank you, Mike. Really, I don't know how we could have done this without you. Mike's voice softened. You're strong, Jessica. You would have found a way. But I'm glad I could help. They ended the call, and Jessica sat quietly for a moment, letting the weight of the news settle over her. She felt lighter, as if a burden she'd been carrying for weeks was finally beginning to lift. This was the break they had been waiting for, the chance to turn the tide. When Tom got home that evening, Jessica met him at the door, barely able to contain her excitement. Tom, I just got off the phone with Mike, she began, her eyes bright. He found a witness, someone who used to work with Carter and saw everything. He's willing to testify. Tom's expression shifted from surprise to cautious optimism. Are you serious? That's huge, Jess. If we can get someone with first-hand knowledge to back up everything we've been documenting, it'll make our case so much stronger. Jessica nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and relief. Exactly. This could be the turning point. It feels like we're finally getting somewhere. Tom took her hands, a smile breaking across his face as he pulled her into a hug. This is incredible news, Jess. You've held up so well through all of this. I'm proud of you. Jessica felt a wave of emotion, her eyes stinging with tears she hadn't realized she was holding back. Thank you, Tom. I couldn't have done this without you. They spent the evening talking about what this new development might mean, sharing a sense of cautious hope that they hadn't allowed themselves to feel in weeks. They laughed, reminiscing about simpler times before Carter's harassment had invaded their lives. And for the first time in a long while, Jessica felt like she could breathe easily. The next day, however, Jessica's optimism wavered when she received a call from an unknown number while at work. She hesitated before answering, her stomach twisting with unease. Hello, she said, her voice cautious. Jessica, a familiar, chilling voice replied. It was Carter. Jessica's blood ran cold. She gripped the phone tightly, struggling to keep her voice steady. What do you want, Carter? Carter let out a mocking chuckle. Oh, I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're not getting too comfortable. I wouldn't want you to forget who you're dealing with. Jessica's pulse quickened, a surge of anger flaring beneath her fear. This is harassment, Carter. You're digging yourself a deeper hole with every call you make. He scoffed, clearly unfazed. I wouldn't worry too much about me, Jessica. You should worry about yourself and your family. I hear you've been busy. Quite a little team you've put together to try and bring me down. Jessica clenched her jaw, refusing to let him see her falter. We're not trying, Carter. We're succeeding, and you're running out of time. There was a pause on the line, and when he spoke again, Carter's tone had shifted, a low, menacing edge creeping into his voice. Be careful, Jessica. Poking around in places you don't belong. People tend to get hurt that way. Jessica felt a shiver run down her spine, but she forced herself to keep her voice calm. That's a threat, Carter, and I'll make sure it's documented. He laughed again, the sound cold and devoid of humor. Go ahead, file your little complaints. But remember, I know where you work, where you live, and I don't mind paying a visit to anyone who gets in my way. Jessica's hand shook as she gripped the phone, but she kept her voice steady. Your threats don't scare me anymore. You're going down, Carter, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." There was a long silence, and then Carter spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll see about that." He hung up, leaving Jessica staring at her phone, a mixture of fear and anger churning in her chest. She felt violated, his words like poison lingering in her mind, but she was also determined. Carter's threats only strengthened her resolve. When Tom came to pick her up from work, she told him everything. His face darkened as he listened, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "He's desperate, Jess. He knows we're close to exposing him, and he's trying to scare you into backing down." Jessica nodded, her voice filled with quiet determination. "It's not going to work. I won't let him intimidate me anymore. He can threaten all he wants, but I'm not backing down." Tom's expression softened, pride evident in his eyes. "You're incredibly strong, Jessica. I'm with you every step of the way." They drove home in silence, both deep in thought. That night, as Jessica lay in bed, she found herself replaying Carter's threats over and over, each word etched into her memory. She knew that he was capable of anything, and that his desperation made him more dangerous than ever. But with each repetition, her fear transformed into a steely resolve. The next morning, she and Tom met with Mike to discuss the witness's statement. Mike's face was grim as he shared the details, but his confidence remained unshaken. "We have everything we need now. With this statement, Carter has no room to escape. It's only a matter of time before he faces justice." Jessica nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Then let's make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Let's put an end to this." As they left the meeting, Jessica felt a newfound strength coursing through her veins. Carter's reign of intimidation and threats would soon be over, and she knew that no matter how hard he fought, he couldn't stop the truth from coming out. The days following Carter's phone call brought a mix of tense anticipation and cautious optimism for Jessica and Tom. Despite the gravity of Carter's threats, the knowledge that they had a credible witness ready to testify kept them focused. They clung to the hope that, soon, Carter's intimidation tactics would be a thing of the past. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Jessica decided to visit her best friend, Lila, for some much-needed comfort and distraction. Lila had always been Jessica's confidant, the friend she could turn to for a listening ear and sound advice. But as much as Jessica had shared about Carter's harassment, she had avoided telling Lila everything. The more serious details had stayed between Jessica, Tom, and Mike, partly to keep Lila out of harm's way and partly to shield her from the weight of the situation. When Jessica arrived at Lila's apartment, she was greeted with a warm hug and the familiar, soothing scent of lavender candles that Lila always kept burning. They settled on the couch with cups of tea, the glow of the candles casting soft, calming shadows across the room. "So," Lila began, a curious but gentle look in her eyes, "are you going to tell me what's really been going on?" Jessica felt her breath catch, the question catching her off guard. She looked down at her tea, the steam swirling up as if it could somehow shield her from the truth. "What do you mean?" Lila's expression softened. "Jess, I know you. I know when something's weighing you down, and I know that it's more than what you've told me. This cop, Carter, he's done more than just bother you, hasn't he?" Jessica hesitated, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her cup. She felt the familiar pull of caution, the instinct to keep Lila in the dark to protect her. But looking into Lila's concerned gaze, she realized that her friend wasn't going to let it go. Lila wanted to know the truth, even if it was painful. Taking a deep breath, Jessica nodded slowly. "You're right. There's more. A lot more." Lila placed a comforting hand on Jessica's arm, her voice soft. "Then tell me, Jess. I'm here for you, no matter what." Jessica took a moment to gather her thoughts, and then she began to recount everything. Carter's threats, his harassment, the incidents that had left her feeling violated and fearful. She told Lila about the witness, about the upcoming testimony, and even about the chilling phone call where Carter had threatened her family. Lila listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to anger as the story unfolded. When Jessica finished, there was a heavy silence between them, filled only by the flickering of the candlelight. Lila finally spoke, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "Jess, I can't believe you've been going through all of this alone. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Jessica sighed, guilt and exhaustion evident in her eyes. "I didn't want to worry you. And honestly, I was scared. Scared of how real everything would feel if I said it out loud. Scared that telling you would make it worse somehow." Lila shook her head, her hand tightening on Jessica's arm. "You don't have to protect me, Jess. I'm your friend. I would have been there, every step of the way." Jessica looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I know, but Carter, he's dangerous, Lila. He's already threatened Tom, Evan, my family. I couldn't risk him coming after you, too." Lila's expression softened, but there was a fierce determination in her eyes. "Jessica, I appreciate that you want to protect me, but he doesn't get to control your life like this. And he definitely doesn't get to keep you isolated from the people who love you." Jessica looked up, the weight of her fear and frustration spilling over. I'm so tired, Lila. Tired of looking over my shoulder, of feeling like he's watching every move I make. It's exhausting." Lila pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. "You're strong, Jess, but you don't have to be strong alone. Let me help you, even if it's just by being here." They sat in silence for a moment, Lila's arms providing a comfort that Jessica hadn't realized she needed. After a few moments, Lila pulled back, a determined look in her eyes. "So what's the next step?" she asked, her voice filled with resolve. Jessica took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "We're building a case. Mike's been gathering evidence, and we have a former colleague of Carter's who's willing to testify. It's a long process, but we're getting there." Lila nodded thoughtfully. "And what can I do?" "I want to help, Jess. I don't care how dangerous it is. I want to be there for you." Jessica hesitated, torn between her need for support and her instinct to keep Lila safe. Just be here, like you are now. That's more than enough." But Lila shook her head, her expression resolute. "I'm serious, Jessica. If there's anything at all, that I can do to help bring this guy down, you need to let me know." Jessica managed a small smile, feeling a renewed sense of strength from Lila's fierce loyalty. "Thank you, Lila. It means the world to me, having you here." Lila smiled back, her eyes soft with affection. "Always, Jess. No matter what." The rest of the evening passed in warm conversation, a welcome distraction from the fear and tension that had plagued Jessica's life. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight of isolation lift, replaced by the comfort of true friendship. It was a reminder that, even in the darkest times, she wasn't alone. As Jessica left Lila's apartment that night, she felt a renewed sense of determination. Carter's intimidation tactics had taken a toll on her, but she had people who loved her, people who were willing to stand by her no matter what. And with their support, she knew she could face whatever lay ahead. The drive home was quiet, the city lights reflecting off the windshield as Jessica allowed herself a rare moment of peace. She knew the battle wasn't over yet, but with each passing day, the walls around Carter were closing in. When she walked into her apartment, Tom was waiting for her with a warm smile. He embraced her, his presence grounding her after the emotional evening. "How was Lila?" he asked, his voice filled with gentle curiosity. Jessica leaned into his embrace, feeling a surge of gratitude for the support surrounding her. "She was exactly what I needed," she replied. "She knows everything now, and she wants to help." Tom pulled back slightly, looking at her with admiration. "You have a lot of people who care about you, Jess. Don't forget that." Jessica smiled, her heart filled with gratitude and resolve. "I won't. And with all of you by my side, I know we're going to see this through to the end." As they stood together, surrounded by the quiet peace of their home, Jessica felt a sense of hope that had been absent for too long. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt certain that they were on the path to justice. The following week, Jessica's resolve grew stronger. With her circle of support, Tom, Mike, and now Lila, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just surviving Carter's harassment. She was actively fighting back. But even with the determination pushing her forward, the weight of fear and anxiety continued to haunt her, lingering in the back of her mind, especially at night when she was alone with her thoughts. One evening, after a long day of work and another intense meeting with Mike, Jessica returned home, feeling the exhaustion seep into her bones. Tom was still out, caught up in his own work, and the apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. She set down her bag, the silence pressing in on her, amplifying the faint creaks and rustles that normally went unnoticed. She walked to the kitchen, trying to shake off the eerie feeling, but her hand froze mid-reach for a glass. Her phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. Jessica's stomach twisted as she stared at it, dread pooling in her chest. She had a horrible feeling about who it might be. Summoning her courage, she picked up the phone and answered. "Hello?" There was a brief pause, and then, just as she had feared, Carter's voice slithered through the line, cold and mocking. "Hello, Jessica. Miss me?" Jessica's blood ran cold, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "What do you want, Carter?" He chuckled, a dark, chilling sound. "Oh, just checking in. I hear you've been busy lately, digging around, making friends in high places. Quite the little investigator, aren't you?" Jessica's jaw tightened. "We both know what you're doing is illegal, Carter. It's only a matter of time before you're held accountable." Carter's tone shifted, taking on a menacing edge. "Is that so? You seem awfully confident for someone who's treading on thin ice." "Careful, Jessica. One wrong move, and everything you care about could slip away." Jessica's grip on the phone tightened, her heart pounding. "This is harassment, and every word you're saying is being documented." "I'm not afraid of you, Carter." He let out a slow, mocking laugh. "Oh, you should be. People who cross me tend to regret it. But you wouldn't know anything about that yet, would you?" Jessica took a steadying breath, anger flaring beneath her fear. "You're only making things worse for yourself. The more you push, the harder you're going to fall." There was a silence on the line, thick with tension, and then Carter spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, dripping with malice. "You think you're so safe, Jessica, but remember, there's always a moment when people like you slip up." With that, he hung up, leaving Jessica standing in the darkened kitchen, her heart racing, her body tense with a mixture of fear and fury. She wanted to scream, to let out the torrent of emotions that had been building up over the past few weeks, but instead, she clenched her fists, willing herself to stay strong. The sound of the front door opening pulled her from her thoughts, and she turned to see Tom stepping into the apartment. His face softened as he noticed her standing in the kitchen, but the moment he saw her expression, his own grew serious. "Jessica, are you all right?" He moved to her side, concern etched into every line of his face. She took a shaky breath, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "It was him, Tom. Carter. He just called. He threatened me again. He knows what we're doing." Tom's eyes darkened, his jaw clenching as he wrapped his arms around her. "What did he say?" Jessica closed her eyes, leaning into his embrace. "He's trying to scare me. He keeps hinting that something bad will happen if I don't back down. He thinks he can break me." Tom tightened his hold, his voice low and filled with a quiet, fierce determination. "He's desperate, Jessica. That's why he's pushing so hard. He knows we're close to bringing him down." Jessica pulled back slightly, looking up at him, her voice laced with worry. "But what if he does something, Tom? What if he follows through with his threats?" Tom cupped her face in his hands, his gaze unwavering. "We're not going to let him. You're not alone in this, Jess. We have people who believe in you, who are fighting for you. And Carter? He's only got himself. Bullies like him crumble when they're exposed. And he's going to crumble." Jessica felt a wave of emotion rise within her, her eyes filling with tears as she looked into Tom's steady gaze. "I'm so tired, Tom. Tired of feeling like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next threat." Tom's thumb gently brushed her cheek, wiping away a tear. "I know, and I wish I could take that fear away from you. But every day, we're getting closer. We're building a case that he can't ignore. Soon, he won't be able to intimidate anyone ever again." Jessica nodded, a flicker of hope breaking through the heaviness in her chest. "I want to believe that. I want to believe this nightmare will end." Tom pulled her into another embrace, his voice filled with warmth and resolve. "It will. You're stronger than you realize, Jessica. You're standing up to him, and that takes a kind of strength most people never find. Don't let him make you doubt that." They stood in silence for a moment, Jessica drawing strength from his presence. She felt the fear ease, replaced by a renewed determination. She wasn't just a victim in this story. She was fighting back, and she wasn't going to let Carter win. After a few moments, Tom spoke again, his voice gentler. "How about we take a break from all of this? Just for tonight. We'll make some dinner, watch a movie, and let ourselves have a moment of peace. I think we could both use it." Jessica managed a small smile, nodding. "That sounds perfect. I think I could really use a distraction." They spent the evening cooking together, laughing over small mishaps in the kitchen as they tried out a new recipe. For a few hours, Jessica allowed herself to relax, to savor the simple joy of being with Tom, free from the weight of fear that had plagued her for so long. Later, as they curled up on the couch, a soft glow from the TV illuminating the room, Jessica felt a rare moment of peace settle over her. The tension in her body eased, her mind quieted, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that there might be an end to the nightmare. As she drifted off to sleep, her head resting on Tom's shoulder, Jessica felt a glimmer of hope that, despite the darkness she had endured, there was still light on the horizon. The next morning, Jessica woke up feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The evening spent with Tom had given her a rare moment of peace, and for once, she felt a fragile optimism start to grow. However, that hope was abruptly shattered when she checked her phone and found a message from Mike. "We need to talk. Urgent. Meet me at the office as soon as possible." Jessica felt her stomach churn with a sense of foreboding as she read the message. She quickly dressed, her heart pounding as she made her way to the office where Mike and Tom were waiting. The gravity of Mike's message hung heavily in the air, and by the time she walked into the meeting room, Jessica's optimism had turned into anxious dread. Mike and Tom looked up as she entered. Their expressions were grim, which only served to deepen her unease. She closed the door behind her, taking a seat across from them. "Mike, what's going on?" Jessica asked, her voice betraying a hint of desperation. Mike sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We've hit a major roadblock, Jess. Carter. He's made a move we didn't anticipate." Jessica felt her heart drop, her fingers clenching around the edge of the table. "What did he do?" Mike exchanged a glance with Tom, who gave him a slight nod, urging him to continue. "He's filed a countercomplaint against you, Jessica. He's accusing you of harassment and defamation, claiming that you've been conducting a personal vendetta against him. He's twisting everything to make it seem like you're the one targeting him." Jessica felt a surge of anger and disbelief, her voice trembling. "What? That's insane, Mike. He's the one who's been stalking and threatening me, and now he's trying to turn it around on me." Mike nodded, his expression tight with frustration. "He's using his connections within the department to give weight to his claims. And since he's a police officer, there are people willing to take his side. It's complicated everything. We'll have to handle this delicately, or he could use it to weaken our case against him." Tom's hand reached across the table, resting reassuringly on hers. "Jess, don't let this shake you. Carter is grasping at straws. He's desperate, and he's playing his last cards to make you back down." Jessica took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the anger bubbling inside her was overwhelming. "This is exactly what he wants, isn't it? To make me feel powerless, to make me doubt everything." Mike's gaze softened, his tone calm but firm. "We knew he'd try something drastic. He's trying to turn this into a game of he said, but we have solid evidence, and we're not letting this stop us." Jessica's voice was thick with frustration. "But this means it's going to take even longer, doesn't it? This countercomplaint could drag the entire process out. And meanwhile, he's free to keep harassing me." Mike nodded reluctantly. "It's likely, but there's something we can do to counter his move. We'll need to gather testimonies from people who can vouch for your character, people who can speak to the harassment you've faced. Lila, Evan, maybe even colleagues who've seen the toll it's taken on you." Jessica hesitated, her mind racing. The idea of involving more people, of making her friends and family revisit the trauma, felt overwhelming. I don't want to drag everyone else into this mess. They've already been through enough. Tom leaned forward, his gaze steady and reassuring. Jess, they'll want to help. You've been dealing with this mostly on your own for too long. Let them support you. Jessica looked down, her hands twisting together. It's just, I feel like I'm losing control. He's twisted everything, and now I'm the one who looks like a threat. Mike's voice was gentle but firm. That's exactly what he's counting on, Jess. He wants you to feel isolated, to make you question your own reality. But you're not alone in this. We're here, and we're not going to let him manipulate this situation. Jessica met his gaze, feeling the determination in his eyes bolster her own resolve. Okay, then let's fight this. I'm not going to let him win. If he wants to turn this into a battle of testimonies, then we'll make sure he hears the truth. Tom squeezed her hand, a small smile breaking through his serious expression. That's the Jessica I know. He's tried to wear you down, but you're still standing. And that's something he can't take away. Jessica nodded, the fire returning to her eyes. You're right. He can't take away my strength. Not anymore. Just as they were gathering their things to start planning their next steps, Mike's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. What is it? Jessica asked, immediately sensing that something was wrong. Mike looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and anger. It's Carter. He's going public. He's filed his complaint officially, and he's using his connections in the media to spread his version of the story. There's already an article online painting you as the aggressor. Jessica felt her stomach twist, her heart sinking as she processed the news. He's using the media to turn people against me? Mike nodded grimly. Yes, he's claiming that you've been harassing him, that you're on some personal crusade against him. He's portraying himself as the victim. Tom's face was a mask of anger, his fists clenching at his sides. This is a new low, even for him. He's manipulating the public to cover his tracks. Jessica felt her chest tighten, a surge of frustration and helplessness crashing over her. How do we fight that? Once a story like that gets out, people believe it. They'll see me as the problem. Mike took a deep breath, his voice steady. We'll fight it by sticking to the truth. We have witnesses, evidence, and a strong case. We can't control the media, but we can control how we respond. We'll reach out to people who can support your side, people who know the real story. Jessica's hands shook as she clutched the edge of the table. I can't believe he's doing this. I feel like he's invading every part of my life. First it was my safety, now it's my reputation. Tom placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with quiet strength. Jessica, we knew he'd try to do whatever it took to protect himself, but we're not backing down. No matter what he tries, we'll keep pushing forward. Jessica nodded, swallowing back the tears that threatened to spill. You're right. I won't let him break me. He can twist things all he wants, but I know the truth, and I have people who believe in me. Mike gave her a reassuring smile. That's exactly what we need, Jessica. We'll gather testimonies from people who can vouch for your character, and we'll make sure the truth is heard. Jessica took a deep breath, allowing their support to ground her. Thank you, both of you. I don't know how I'd get through this without you. Tom squeezed her shoulder, his expression filled with pride and love. We're with you, Jess, every step of the way. As they began to strategize their next moves, Jessica felt the fear and anger transform into a steely resolve. Carter might have tried to manipulate the public, but she wasn't going to let him control her story. She would fight, not just for herself, but for everyone he had wronged. The days following Carter's public attack on Jessica's character were some of the hardest she had ever endured, with news articles and online discussions portraying her as a spiteful, vindictive woman. Jessica felt as if her entire world was unraveling. Every glance from a stranger felt suspicious. Every whisper seemed to carry Carter's lies. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was trapped, surrounded by the weight of accusations that weren't hers to bear. One evening, Jessica sat alone on her living room couch, her eyes scanning the flood of online comments about her. Each cruel word, each unfounded accusation, cut deeper than the last. She knew she shouldn't look, that giving attention to Carter's lies would only hurt her more, but she couldn't seem to stop. It was as if she needed to understand the full scope of the damage to prepare herself for what was to come. Her phone vibrated beside her, breaking her from the trance of hurtful words. It was a message from Tom. On my way home, I brought dinner. Hang in there, Jess. We're getting through this. She felt a surge of relief at his words, the warmth of his support soothing the pain, if only slightly. A few minutes later, Tom arrived, balancing 2 takeout boxes and a bottle of wine. His face was lined with worry, but he managed a reassuring smile as he entered. "Thought we could use something comforting tonight," he said, setting the food down and joining her on the couch. "How are you holding up?" Jessica forced a small smile, but she couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. "I don't know. Some moments, I feel strong enough to fight back, but most of the time, I just feel defeated. Like I'm constantly on trial, and I can't defend myself." Tom reached out, taking her hands in his touch grounding her. "You're not on trial, Jess. Not in the way he wants people to think. This is his game, and he's doing everything he can to make you feel isolated. But remember, you're not alone in this." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, struggling to keep her composure. I never thought he would go this far. The lies, the manipulation. He's turning people against me who don't even know me. It's humiliating." Tom gently tilted her face back toward him, his gaze steady and filled with determination. "Listen to me, Jessica. This is exactly what he wants. To make you question yourself, to make you feel vulnerable. But we're close. The witness is ready. We're gathering testimonies from your friends and family, and the truth is on our side." She nodded, his words like a balm on her wounded spirit. But even with his support, the fear lingered, dark and heavy. "It's just hard to remember that sometimes. The way people look at me now, it's like they see his version of me, not who I really am." Tom pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I know, and it's unfair. But Carter's lies are just that, lies. People who matter will see the truth, and the rest, they don't know you. Don't let them have power over you." Jessica closed her eyes, letting herself feel the comfort of his embrace. For a few moments, they stayed like that, his presence a lifeline in the storm of accusations surrounding her. After a moment, she pulled back, a new resolve in her eyes. "I need to fight back, not just in court, but for myself. I can't keep hiding, letting his lies define me. If he's going to try to destroy my reputation, then I need to be the one to show people who I really am." Tom's face softened with pride, and he nodded. "That's the spirit, Jess. But what do you have in mind?" Jessica thought for a moment, considering her options. Maybe I should speak out. Go public with my side of the story. Share what he's been doing, not just to me, but to everyone he's hurt. Maybe if people hear it from me, they'll see the truth." Tom considered her words carefully. It's a risky move. Once you're in the public eye, it's hard to control the narrative. But I think it's a powerful idea. If you're ready to speak out, I'll be with you every step of the way. Jessica took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of fear and empowerment. "I know it's risky, but I can't stay silent anymore. I'm done letting him control my life. If I don't speak up now, he'll keep twisting the story, and I'll keep feeling helpless. This is my chance to take back control." Tom squeezed her hand, a proud smile spreading across his face. "Then let's do it. We'll reach out to Mike. Figure out a way to get your story out there without jeopardizing the case." Jessica felt a spark of hope igniting within her, a spark that had been dimmed by Carter's constant intimidation. "Thank you, Tom. I don't know how I'd be doing any of this without you." He brushed a lock of hair from her face, his gaze warm and filled with unwavering support. "You're doing all of this because you're strong, Jess. I'm just lucky to stand beside you." They shared a quiet meal together, the weight of their decisions settling between them. Jessica felt the fear linger, but it was tempered by a new sense of purpose. She would speak out, tell her story, and show the world the truth. It wouldn't be easy, but she was done living in the shadows of Carter's lies. The next morning, Jessica and Tom met with Mike, explaining her decision to go public. Mike listened carefully, his face thoughtful as he considered the risks. "It's a bold move, Jessica," he said finally, his voice steady. "But I can see why you want to do it. If you're ready, we'll make sure your side is told in the most effective way possible." Jessica nodded, her determination unwavering. "I want people to know what he's done, not just to me but to anyone who's crossed his path. I want him to be exposed for what he is." Mike gave her a reassuring smile. "Then we'll put together a plan. I'll reach out to a trusted journalist, someone who can present your story with the respect it deserves. We'll make sure the truth is heard." Jessica felt a surge of gratitude, a flicker of relief breaking through her anxiety. "Thank you, Mike. I'm ready. Whatever it takes, I'm ready." As they finalized their plans, Jessica felt the fear recede, replaced by a fierce resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had been silenced, everyone who had suffered under Carter's intimidation. She was ready to reclaim her voice, to stand tall in the face of his lies, and to show the world the truth. Jessica sat in the small conference room with Tom and Mike, the air thick with tension as they waited for the journalist they had reached out to. The room was silent, except for the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Jessica felt her heartbeat quicken, a mixture of fear and determination racing through her veins. This was it, the beginning of her final stand against Carter. She was finally taking her story back. Tom leaned over, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're doing the right thing, Jess. The truth will be out there, and people will finally see Carter for who he really is." Jessica nodded, her voice steady but laced with tension. "I know. It's just hard, knowing I'm putting myself out there like this. But I can't let him keep defining me." Mike glanced up from his notes, his expression supportive. "And you won't be alone in this. I vetted this journalist carefully. She has a reputation for integrity and compassion. She's here to tell your story, not sensationalize it." Just then, the door opened and a woman stepped in, her demeanor professional yet warm. She was in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and an air of confidence that instantly put Jessica at ease. She extended a hand, offering a friendly smile. "Jessica, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Rachel Turner," the journalist said, shaking Jessica's hand firmly. Jessica returned the handshake, feeling a bit of her anxiety melt away. "Thank you for coming, Rachel. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my story." Rachel nodded, her eyes meeting Jessica's with understanding. "I understand how hard this must be for you. My role here is to give you the platform to tell your truth, in your own words. We'll take this one step at a time, and if at any point you feel uncomfortable, just let me know." Jessica took a deep breath, glancing at Tom and Mike, who both gave her encouraging nods. "All right, I'm ready." They settled into their seats, and Rachel pulled out a small recorder, placing it gently on the table between them. "If it's okay with you, I'd like to start by asking how this all began. How did Officer Carter's harassment start, and how did it escalate to the point we're at now?" Jessica took a moment to collect her thoughts, her gaze fixed on the recorder. When she spoke, her voice was soft but filled with conviction. "It all started with a random encounter in the park. At first, I thought it was just a routine stop. He was checking on something, asking questions, but then he kept showing up, making these veiled threats, trying to intimidate me. It felt wrong from the start." Rachel listened intently, her expression attentive and empathetic. "How did that make you feel, knowing he was targeting you in that way?" Jessica looked down, her fingers twisting together. "I felt powerless. Here was a man with a badge, someone who's supposed to protect people, using his authority to make me feel afraid. Every time I saw him, it was like he was reminding me of how easily he could control my life." Tom's hand rested on her shoulder, a steady source of strength. Jessica glanced at him, drawing courage from his presence. Rachel leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. "Jessica, I know this is painful to recount, but it's so important for people to understand what you've been through. Can you tell me how things escalated? When did it become clear that this was more than just an isolated incident?" Jessica's jaw clenched as she recalled the past few months, the countless encounters, the nights she spent lying awake, fearing the worst. "He started following me, showing up at my work, even reaching out to my family. When he threatened my brother, that's when I realized this wasn't just about scaring me. He was trying to tear my life apart, to isolate me from everyone who cared about me. Rachel's eyes softened, and she nodded sympathetically. That must have been terrifying. How did you find the strength to keep going? Jessica took a deep breath, her gaze shifting to Tom. It was people like Tom, Mike, and my friends who kept me going. Every time I felt like giving up, they reminded me that I wasn't alone, that Carter's lies and intimidation couldn't erase the truth. And as scared as I was, I knew I had to stand up to him, not just for myself, but for anyone else he might hurt. Rachel smiled, admiration evident in her eyes. That's strength. It's inspiring, Jessica. People need to hear this. They need to see that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep fighting despite it. Jessica's voice softened, the weight of her journey settling over her. I've been afraid every single day, but I refuse to let him silence me. This is my story, and I'm taking it back. Rachel reached across the table, giving Jessica's hand a gentle squeeze. And you are. We're going to make sure your voice is heard. They continued talking for hours, Rachel guiding Jessica through each painful memory, each moment of fear and defiance. Jessica shared the depth of her experience, the mental toll it had taken, and the unwavering support of those around her. With each word, she felt a weight lifting from her chest, the shadows of Carter's intimidation receding as she reclaimed her narrative. By the time they finished, Jessica felt both drained and liberated, as if she had shed the burden of her silence. Rachel turned off the recorder, giving Jessica a warm smile. Thank you, Jessica. That took an incredible amount of bravery. I promise you, we'll tell your story with the dignity and respect it deserves. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, gratitude flooding her. Thank you, Rachel. I feel like I can finally breathe. Tom wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. You did it, Jess. You took back control. No matter what Carter does next, he can't take that away from you. Mike nodded, his expression one of admiration. You've shown incredible resilience, Jessica. Carter may have his lies, but you have the truth, and that will prevail. Jessica wiped her eyes, smiling through her tears. I just want this to be over. I want to live without looking over my shoulder, without wondering if he's lurking somewhere, ready to strike. Rachel's voice was calm and reassuring. And soon, you will. Your story is going to make an impact. People will know what kind of man he is, and they'll see the strength you've shown in standing up to him. Jessica felt a renewed sense of hope, a lightness that had been absent for so long. She was finally moving forward, finally taking steps toward a life free from fear. She stood, turning to face Tom and Mike, her voice filled with resolve. I'm ready to finish this, she said, her words steady and filled with purpose. No more hiding, no more letting him control me. This ends now. As they left the conference room, Jessica walked with her head held high, a sense of peace washing over her. She didn't know what Carter's next move would be, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer afraid of him. She had reclaimed her power, and nothing he did could take that away. A few days after Jessica's story was released, it began to gain traction. Her account spread across news outlets and social media, and people responded with outrage at the abuse of power she had endured. Messages of support poured in from friends, strangers, and even former victims of Carter who had stayed silent out of fear. For the first time, Jessica felt the tide turning in her favor, the weight of public opinion shifting against Carter. Late one afternoon, as Jessica was leaving work, she saw a familiar figure waiting near the entrance of the parking lot. Her heart skipped a beat, a mix of fear and determination coursing through her as she recognized Carter standing there, his arms crossed, watching her with a cold, calculating stare. Jessica took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. She would not let him see her fear. Carter stepped forward, a twisted smirk on his face. Well, if it isn't the little star of the media, he sneered, his voice laced with contempt. Enjoying your 15 minutes, Jessica? Jessica held her ground, her voice steady. This isn't about fame, Carter. This is about justice, about people finally seeing you for who you really are. He scoffed, narrowing his eyes. You think you've won? Because you got a few people to feel sorry for you? I don't care what the public thinks, Jessica. People like me. We don't just go down because of a sob story. Jessica clenched her fists, anger flaring within her. People like you? You mean cowards who use their power to hurt others? You've done nothing but hide behind your badge, Carter. But that badge won't protect you anymore. Carter's expression darkened, his voice lowering to a threatening whisper. You think this is over, don't you? That just because you got some journalists to believe your lies, I'm going to back down? Jessica took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. They're not lies, Carter. They're the truth, and you know it. The world knows it now, too. Your days of intimidating people are over. For a moment, Carter's confident facade cracked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But he quickly recovered, his voice laced with venom. You really think a few articles will make a difference? I've been in this game a long time, Jessica. People like me. We know how to make problems disappear. Jessica's heart raced, but she refused to show weakness. Then why are you here, Carter? If you're so untouchable, why bother confronting me? Carter's face twisted into a sneer. Because I wanted to see the look on your face when you realized just how little power you really have. You can rally the media all you want, but at the end of the day, I'm the one in control. Jessica felt a surge of defiance rise within her. No, Carter, you don't control me. Not anymore. I've taken back my life, and there's nothing you can do to change that. Carter took another step forward, his eyes glinting with malice. You're playing a dangerous game, Jessica. People who go up against me don't walk away unscathed. Before Jessica could respond, Tom appeared at her side, his presence steady and unyielding. His gaze was locked on Carter, a cold intensity in his eyes. Back off, Carter, Tom said, his voice calm but filled with an underlying threat. Your games are over. Jessica has the support she needs, and you're not scaring anyone here. Carter's face contorted with anger, and he glared at Tom, his voice filled with disdain. Oh, look, her little protector. Do you think you can protect her from everything, Daniels? You're as naive as she is. Tom stepped closer, standing protectively in front of Jessica. This isn't naivety, Carter. It's justice. Something you know nothing about. Carter's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Jessica saw a flash of genuine fear in his eyes. You're all so eager to see me go down. But remember, Daniels, I know things. I can make things very uncomfortable for you. Tom's expression didn't falter. Do what you want, Carter. You've crossed too many lines. The truth is out there, and you're the one who should be afraid. You're not above the law, and people like you always get what's coming. Jessica stepped forward, her voice unwavering as she faced Carter directly. I'm not scared of you anymore, Carter. Your intimidation, your threats, they don't work on me. Not anymore. Carter's face twisted with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. You'll regret this, Jessica. I promise you that. Jessica met his gaze, her voice calm but filled with conviction. No, Carter. The only one who's going to regret anything here is you. Carter held her gaze for a moment longer, the fury in his eyes simmering. But as the weight of their words settled over him, he finally turned and walked away, his steps heavy with the knowledge that he had lost control. Jessica felt a wave of relief wash over her body trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. She turned to Tom, her voice barely above a whisper. It's really over, isn't it? Tom wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Yes, Jess. You stood up to him. You took back your life. And he knows he's lost. Jessica closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek as the weight of everything she had endured finally began to lift. She had faced her worst fear and emerged stronger, reclaiming the power Carter had tried so desperately to strip from her. As they walked back to the car, Jessica felt a sense of peace settle over her, a peace she hadn't felt in months. She was free, at last, from the shadow of Carter's intimidation. She had taken back control of her life, and nothing he did could ever change that. In the following days, Jessica's life began to return to a sense of normalcy. The encounter with Carter had been the final nail in the coffin of his control over her. But just as she was settling into this newfound peace, Another unexpected turn awaited her. One evening, as Jessica and Tom were preparing dinner, Jessica's phone buzzed with a call from Mike. She answered, her heart skipping a beat at the serious tone in his voice. "Jessica, I need you and Tom to come down to the station. Something big just happened." Jessica's pulse quickened. "Mike, what is it? Is it about Carter?" Mike's voice was steady but held a hint of satisfaction. "Yes, we've got him. Officially." Jessica's hand flew to her mouth, shock and relief washing over her. "Oh my God, we're on our way." They hurried to the station, anticipation thick in the air as they drove. The weight of all they'd been through together, all the battles and sleepless nights, felt suddenly closer to resolution. When they arrived, Mike was waiting for them in the lobby, his expression serious but carrying a gleam of victory in his eyes. "Mike," Jessica breathed, her voice trembling. "Is it really happening?" He nodded, gesturing for them to follow him. "Yes, we just received new evidence. A former associate of Carter's came forward, and with the media pressure, they couldn't ignore it. Internal Affairs conducted a raid at Carter's house this morning, and they found more than they bargained for." Tom exchanged a stunned look with Jessica. "What did they find?" Mike led them down a hallway to a private room where they could talk. "Turns out Carter's been involved in a lot more than just harassing you, Jessica. He's been running a whole web of intimidation, using his position to cover up serious misconduct. This goes beyond you. He's hurt a lot of people, and now it's all unraveling." Jessica took a shaky breath, struggling to process the enormity of what Mike was saying. "So, he's finally facing consequences?" Mike nodded, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "They arrested him this morning. He's being processed as we speak. With all the evidence we have now, including your testimony and the witness accounts, he won't be able to worm his way out of this one." Jessica felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over her. She leaned against Tom, her voice barely a whisper. "It's over. It's really over." Tom wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Yes, Jess, it's finally over." Mike gave them a moment, then continued, his tone softer. "You did this, Jessica. You stood up to him when no one else could. Your courage gave others the strength to speak out." Jessica looked up, her eyes filling with tears of gratitude and relief. "I don't know how to thank you, Mike, for believing me, for standing by me. I wouldn't be here without you." Mike shook his head, a small smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "You don't owe me any thanks, Jessica. This was all you. You're the one who made this happen." They spent a few moments in silence, the weight of their victory settling over them. For Jessica, it felt like the end of a long, grueling battle, a battle that had taken every ounce of strength and courage she had. After a while, Jessica turned to Tom, her voice soft. "I feel like I can finally breathe again, like I'm free." Tom squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with pride. "You are free, Jess, and you're stronger than ever." They left the station together, stepping out into the cool night air. As they walked hand in hand, Jessica felt a profound sense of peace settling within her. She looked up at the stars, the weight of fear and pain lifting with each step. Back at their apartment, Jessica and Tom sat down, sharing a quiet moment as they processed the events of the day. Jessica poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to Tom. "To freedom," she said, raising her glass, her voice filled with a newfound strength. Tom smiled, clinking his glass against hers. "To freedom, and to you, Jess, the bravest person I know." They sat together in silence, savoring the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. The journey had been long and painful, but Jessica had emerged stronger, her spirit unbroken. She knew she would carry scars from this experience, but they would be reminders of her resilience, of the strength she had discovered within herself. For the first time in months, Jessica slept soundly, knowing that Carter was no longer a threat, that her life was her own once more. And as she drifted into sleep, she felt a deep, unshakable certainty. She was finally free. The days following Carter's arrest were surreal for Jessica. Although she no longer had to fear running into him or receiving threatening messages, the remnants of his intimidation lingered in unexpected ways. Every time she stepped outside, she felt herself tense, wondering if she would ever fully feel safe again. But despite these lingering fears, Jessica was slowly learning to embrace her freedom. One afternoon, as she was packing up her things at work, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Lila, her best friend, who had been one of her greatest supporters through this entire ordeal. "Meet me at our spot by the park? I want to see you." Jessica smiled at the message, feeling warmth spread through her. She texted back, "On my way." The air was crisp and cool as Jessica made her way to the park, the familiar path filling her with a sense of nostalgia and comfort. When she reached the small bench where she and Lila often met, she saw her friend waiting, a big smile spreading across her face as Jessica approached. "Jess." Lila stood up, wrapping Jessica in a tight hug. "I can't tell you how proud I am of you. You did it. You really did it." Jessica felt her throat tighten with emotion as she hugged Lila back. "I couldn't have done it without you. Your support, your words, they kept me going, even on the worst days." Lila pulled back, holding Jessica's shoulders and studying her with a gentle smile. "You look different, you know? Lighter. Like a huge weight has finally lifted." Jessica took a deep breath, nodding. "It has. I can't explain the relief I feel, but there are still moments where I catch myself feeling afraid, wondering if it's really over." Lila squeezed her hands. "That's completely normal. After everything you've been through, it'll take time to fully heal. But you're getting there, one day at a time." Jessica nodded, feeling a quiet sense of peace settle over her. "You're right. And I have so many people to thank for helping me. I don't know what I would have done without you, Tom, and Mike." They sat down on the bench together, watching as people strolled through the park, children laughing and playing in the distance. The simplicity of the scene felt almost like a balm, soothing the scars that Jessica still carried. Lila leaned in, her voice softer. "What about you, Jess? How are you feeling, really?" Jessica took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the rustling leaves. "Honestly, I feel relieved, but also a bit lost. So much of my life was tied up in fighting him, in trying to stay strong and protect the people I care about. Now that it's over, I'm not sure what comes next." Lila nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable. You've been through something incredibly traumatic, and you've come out stronger. But it makes sense that you'd feel a little unsure of where to go from here." Jessica sighed, her shoulders relaxing as she voiced her worries. "It's strange. I feel like I need to rebuild certain parts of myself. Like there are pieces of me I haven't had the chance to focus on because I was so wrapped up in this fight." Lila gave her a reassuring smile. "Then maybe now is the time for you to do that. To rediscover those parts of yourself. To rebuild, just for you." Jessica met her friend's gaze, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "You're right. I want to find joy again, to feel whole." Lila squeezed her hand. "And you will. You've already done the hardest part, Jess. You've reclaimed your life. Now it's time to live it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the gentle hum of life around them filling the air. Jessica felt a warmth spread through her, the weight of Lila's words grounding her. After a while, Jessica took a deep breath, standing up. "Thank you, Lila. I needed this." Lila stood up too, hugging her once more. "Anytime, Jess. Remember, I'm here. And you have so many people who care about you." As Jessica walked back home, she felt a new sense of purpose stirring within her. The fear that had once held her captive was gradually being replaced by a quiet strength. She was ready to rebuild, to reclaim the parts of herself that had been overshadowed by Carter's darkness. When she arrived home, she found Tom waiting for her with a soft smile. "Hey, how was your walk?" Jessica smiled, warmth flooding her chest. "It was exactly what I needed. Lila and I talked, and I think I'm ready to move forward. Really move forward." Tom stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her. "That's amazing, Jess. I'm so proud of you." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm finally feeling like myself again, Tom. Like I can breathe." Tom held her tightly, his voice filled with warmth. "You deserve every bit of peace you're feeling. And I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." They stood there in silence, the weight of the past months fading as they embraced. For Jessica, This was more than just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a new one where she could finally live without fear, surrounded by the love and support of those who had stood by her. That night, as Jessica lay in bed, she thought about everything she had endured and how far she had come. The scars from Carter's abuse would always be a part of her, but they no longer defined her. She had emerged stronger, more resilient, and with a renewed sense of self. As she closed her eyes, a sense of peace settled over her. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she was ready to face them. She was no longer the woman who lived in fear. She was Jessica, a survivor, a fighter, and someone who had reclaimed her life. Jessica's life continued to find its rhythm in the weeks following Carter's arrest and the quiet, grounding moments with Tom and Lila. But even with the peace settling over her days, a part of her felt compelled to look back, to gather her thoughts, and understand the journey she had taken and the transformation she had undergone. One Saturday afternoon, Jessica sat in her favorite spot by the window, sunlight streaming over the pages of the notebook she'd begun keeping. She wanted to record her thoughts, a way to both process everything and create a reminder of her strength for the future. She was deep in thought when Tom walked in, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, a gentle smile playing on his lips. Jessica looked up, smiling. "Of course. I could use the company." He handed her a mug and settled beside her, glancing at the notebook in her hands. "Writing something important?" She nodded, taking a sip of tea. "I think so. I just feel like I need to put it all down. Everything I felt, every step of the way. It's like I need to release it fully, you know?" Tom nodded, his gaze soft. "I understand. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to honor the past, to recognize how far you've come." Jessica took a deep breath, setting down her tea and looking out the window, her voice quiet but thoughtful. "I went through so much, more than I ever thought I could handle. There were moments when I thought I would break, that Carter would win. But somehow I kept going." Tom placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with pride. "You didn't just keep going, Jess. You fought back. You stood up when no one else would. That takes a kind of strength most people never find." Jessica looked down, tracing the edges of her notebook. "But there's still a part of me that's healing. It's like the scars are there, and some days, they feel more raw than others." Tom's hand moved to gently squeeze hers. "Scars are a reminder of what you've survived, and you're not alone in carrying them. You have people who love you, who've walked this journey with you." Jessica nodded, a quiet smile forming as she looked into his steady gaze. "I know, and I feel incredibly lucky. I don't know what I would have done without you, Tom." He smiled, his eyes warm. "And I feel lucky to have been there with you, to see you grow into the person you are now." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their words settling around them. Jessica flipped through a few pages of her notebook, glancing at the fragments of thoughts and memories she had written. Some pages were filled with raw anger, others with fear, and some with moments of quiet hope. All of it painted a picture of her journey from fear to freedom. Finally, Jessica looked up, her eyes filled with a new sense of peace. "I've been thinking, I want to do something with this. I want to use my story to help others. If there are people out there facing someone like Carter, maybe my experience could give them hope, a reminder that they're not alone." Tom's face lit up with admiration. "That sounds like a beautiful idea, Jess. Turning what you've been through into something that could help others. It's the ultimate way to take back your power." Jessica's smile grew, her voice filled with conviction. "I feel like it's the right thing to do. If I can help even one person find the courage to stand up for themselves, then maybe all of this will have meant something more." Tom nodded, a look of pride and love in his eyes. "You have a way of inspiring people, Jess. I think you'll help more than just one person." Jessica glanced back at her notebook, her mind racing with possibilities. "Maybe I'll start by sharing small parts of my story online, anonymously at first, just to test the waters, see if it resonates." Tom gave her an encouraging smile. "That sounds like a great start. And if you ever want to do more, you know I'll be there, cheering you on." Jessica's heart swelled with gratitude, and she leaned over to hug him, feeling the warmth of his support enveloping her. "Thank you, Tom, for everything. I don't know if I'll ever be able to express how much your support has meant to me." Tom hugged her back, his voice a soft murmur in her ear. "You don't have to, Jess. Just seeing you happy and free is all I need." They sat together for a long time, savoring the peace that had taken root in their lives. Jessica felt a new sense of purpose growing within her, a feeling that had been absent during her darkest days. She knew that her journey was far from over, but it was now one she was choosing to walk with strength, rather than being pushed forward by fear. In the weeks that followed, Jessica began to share snippets of her story on a private blog, cautiously at first. To her surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People left comments of gratitude, others shared their own experiences with difficult situations, and some simply offered words of encouragement. Jessica felt a profound sense of connection with these strangers, each word a reminder that she was no longer alone. One evening, as she read through a particularly moving comment from a reader, Jessica felt tears in her eyes. The comment read, "Your story gave me the courage to speak up about something I've been hiding for years. Thank you for showing me that there's light, even after the darkest moments." She shared the comment with Tom, her heart swelling with emotion. "I never thought sharing my story could have this kind of impact." Tom's arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You're making a difference, Jess. You've taken something painful and turned it into hope for others. That's a gift not everyone can give." Jessica wiped her eyes, feeling a mixture of gratitude and purpose settle within her. I think this is the start of something new. I'm ready to fully move forward now, Tom, and I want to keep helping others find that strength too." He looked at her, his eyes filled with admiration. "Then do it, Jess. Keep sharing your light. The world needs it." Jessica smiled, a quiet joy blooming within her. She knew she would always carry the scars of her past, but they no longer weighed her down. Instead, they had become symbols of her resilience, reminders of the strength she had discovered within herself. As she and Tom sat together, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Jessica felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Her journey had been long and filled with hardship, but she had emerged stronger, more grounded, and with a renewed sense of purpose. She leaned her head against Tom's shoulder, a contented smile on her lips. "Thank you for walking this journey with me. I'm ready for whatever comes next." Tom kissed the top of her head, his voice filled with quiet pride. "And I'll be right here, every step of the way." For Jessica, this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a life lived fully, fearlessly, and filled with purpose. She was ready to embrace the future, knowing that, no matter what challenges came her way, she had the strength to overcome them. As we reflect on Jessica's journey from fear to freedom, it's crucial to consider the profound lessons that emerge from her struggle against Carter's abuse of power. This story is not just about one woman's fight. It serves as a stark reminder of the importance of standing up against injustice, no matter the personal cost. Jessica's resilience shows us that we have the power to reclaim our voices and redefine our narratives, even when faced with overwhelming odds. In a society where the truth can often be obscured by those in positions of power, it's our duty to listen, support, and uplift the voices of those who have been silenced. Jessica's determination to speak out against her harasser not only empowered her, but also inspired others to confront their fears and seek justice. The implications of her story extend beyond her personal experiences. They resonate with anyone who has ever felt powerless or marginalized. So, let's take Jessica's story to heart. Let it remind us to stand up for what is right, to support one another in the fight against injustice, and to speak out when we see wrongdoing. Together, we can create a world where no one has to endure what Jessica did, and where every voice is heard and valued. If you found inspiration in this story, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and together we can make a difference.